Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today, we begin a brand new series, the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Cycle of Rebirth. If you wish to explore the deeper layers of philosophy and the wisdom of life, please subscribe and turn on notifications to join this journey. This channel is a sanctuary for ancient wisdom and the study of human consciousness, a space where we reflect together on life, death, and the profound meaning of awareness itself. The book we'll explore today is one of humanity's most vivid depictions of the afterlife, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, also known as Bardo. If you've ever asked yourself, where does consciousness go after death? Or does the boundary between life and death truly exist? Then this episode is one you must stay with until the very end. If this video resonates with you, your like and subscription mean a great deal to me. Now, let us travel together through 6 centuries of the human consciousness journey. This book is not merely a religious scripture. It is a guide through death and rebirth, a spiritual map and compass that transforms fear of death into an opportunity for enlightenment. But how this sacred text came into the world is itself a story of myth, history, and humanity's search for inner truth. Let us retrace that journey, one that spans more than 600 years. In the 8th century, Buddhism was just beginning to take root in Tibet. A great master from India, Padmasambhava, known in Tibet as Guru Rinpoche, the precious teacher, traveled across the land spreading profound teachings. He was not merely a monk, but a mystic, tantric adept, and spiritual reformer. He united Tibet's native beliefs with Buddhism, placing the question, what happens to consciousness after death, at the very center of his practice. One day, Padmasambhava called his most devoted disciple, Yeshe Tsogyal, and said, "The world is not yet ready for this teaching, but a time will come when people will fear death, lose their moral compass, and forget the truth of life and consciousness. Then this scripture must reappear." He called this teaching a terma, a hidden treasure, and instructed Yeshe Tsogyal to conceal it deep within mountains, temples, and caves. Among those hidden texts was the very scripture that centuries later would emerge as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So what exactly is terma? In Tibetan Buddhism, it means a hidden treasure, sacred knowledge intentionally concealed by an enlightened master for discovery by future generations. Padmasambhava didn't just leave behind scriptures. He left mantras, meditation methods, and visions, all sealed as terma. He declared, "When truth is forgotten, it shall reappear through those who awaken." Those awakened beings are called tertons, literally meaning treasure revealers. They are not explorers in the ordinary sense. In deep meditative absorption, samadhi, they receive visions showing where the treasures lie hidden. Padmasambhava is said to have prophesied to Yeshe Tsogyal, "Seal this teaching now, but one day a spiritual descendant of mine will find it. He will know the time and the place, for I have already set it." 6 centuries passed. In the 14th century, a young monk named Lingpa was born in Tibet, 1326 and 1386. Since childhood, he dreamt of strange symbols and sounds. In deep meditation, he beheld the image of Padmasambhava himself. Then a female deity, Dakini, whispered to him, "You were once a disciple of Guru Rinpoche. You were reborn to reveal the hidden treasures to the world." Following his visions, Lingpa journeyed to Mount Gnam in eastern Tibet, a sacred place said to be where heaven meets earth. Inside a deep cave, he sensed a vibration behind the wall. When he cleared the stones, a metal chest appeared, containing palm leaf manuscripts and ritual texts. On the cover, these words were inscribed, "Bardo, the teaching for liberation, through hearing in the intermediate state." That discovery was the Tibetan Book of the Dead. What did this discovery mean? It revealed that enlightenment is possible even in the moment of death. Lingpa translated and organized the text, realizing that death itself could be a gateway to liberation. The book says, "At the moment of death, the mind beholds its own pure light. The ignorant are seized by fear and enter the cycle of rebirth. The awakened recognize the light and are liberated. In Buddhism, this light represents both spiritual awakening and the wisdom of the Buddha, the brightness that dispels the darkness of ignorance. This scripture is not a mere funeral text. It is a philosophical declaration that life and death are not opposites, but two continuous phases of the same consciousness. Death is not an end. It is the beginning of the Bardo, the intermediate state between lives, which lasts for about 49 days according to Tibetan belief. Karma Lingpa said, "This teaching is not mine. It is the gift of Guru Rinpoche, left to heal humanity's fear." Was this discovery just a coincidence or the fulfillment of a prophecy? Consider this. The scripture was found around the 14th century, exactly when Tibetan society was spiritually unstable and moral values in decline. Precisely the era Padmasambhava had foretold. Tibetan masters interpret it this way. Padmasambhava did not predict a date. He foresaw a time and consciousness in history when his teaching would be needed. Thus, Karma Lingpa did not calculate 6 centuries. He simply felt within himself that the time had come. It was not memory, but the awakening of a spiritual DNA inherited from his teacher. So what does the discovery of this text mean for us today? It is an invitation to awaken beyond the fear of death. For centuries, this teaching has been the core of Tibetan, Buddhist rituals and meditation. And in the 20th century, scholar W.I. Evans-Wentz translated it into English as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, introducing it to the world. Since then, philosophers, psychologists, and even physicians have regarded it as one of the most profound works on death and consciousness. Carl Jung wrote in his commentary, "Though it speaks of death, its true subject is life. It is the journey of the human mind facing its own depths. To understand death, then, is to understand life itself." The rediscovery of the Tibetan Book of the Dead was not the accident of one monk, but the continuation of a 600-year lineage of consciousness. From Padmasambhava in the 8th century to Karma Lingpa in the 14th, it all echoes one truth. Truth may be hidden, but it can never be lost. And this scripture whispers to each of us, do not fear the end of life. When you truly awaken, the end becomes the beginning of a new seeing. The story of this book is not merely legend. It is a mirror reflecting how consciousness evolves and how humanity learns to awaken. May this journey bring a small light and peace to your life as well. If today's talk touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and enable notifications so we can continue exploring the deeper questions of life and awareness together. In the next episode, we will enter the secret world of Bardo, the realm between life and death, and the mystery of the monk who unveiled it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy exploring ancient wisdom, consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell. Let's journey together into one of humanity's most mysterious spiritual texts, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the hidden origins of a sacred book. Greetings, friends. Today, we travel beyond the boundaries of time into the mountains of Tibet, a place where myth and meditation intertwine. This is the birthplace of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a text that has fascinated mystics, scholars, and seekers for centuries. But to truly understand this book, we must first step into the world, from which it was born, the luminous realm of Vajrayana Buddhism, known as the Diamond Vehicle, or the Path of Indestructible Wisdom. Vajra, in ancient Sanskrit, means both thunderbolt and diamond. It represents two inseparable powers, the lightning that pierces illusion, and the diamond that cannot be broken. Together they symbolize a truth, so radiant that ignorance itself shatters before it. This is not a path of blind faith or intellectual study alone. It is a path of direct experience, a spiritual technology aimed at transforming the mind instantly through symbols, rituals, and the sacred bond between teacher and student. The oldest lineage, Nyingma, the Ancient Ones. Among the many branches of Tibetan Buddhism, the oldest and most mystical is Nyingma, which literally means the ancient. Its roots reach back to the 8th century, to the arrival of a master whose presence forever changed the spiritual landscape of Tibet, Guru Rinpoche. Padmasambhava. He was not a mere monk. He was a sage of immense power, a yogi, astrologer, healer, and mystic. To Tibetans, he became the second Buddha, the one who tamed the spirits of the high plateau and planted the seed of enlightenment in a land of storms and sky. They say Guru Rinpoche is the most precious among all teachers. But this title, Rinpoche, meaning the precious one, is not just a name. It is a recognition of spiritual realization itself. Through him began the great tradition of Terma, the hidden treasures. The hidden treasures, Terma, and the prophecy of future discovery. Padmasambhava foresaw that future generations would fall into confusion and spiritual darkness. To protect the light of wisdom, he concealed his teachings not only in caves and temples, but within the very consciousness of his disciples. He said, "When the time of great confusion arrives, a destined student will rediscover these teachings." Thus was born the tradition of Terma, the hidden treasures spiritual texts, rituals and mantras hidden across centuries, waiting for the right mind to awaken to them. Those who uncover these treasures are known as Tertans, the treasure revealers. Among them, one name shines brightest, Karma Lingpa, the awakening of Karma Lingpa. Karma Lingpa was said to be a child touched by dreams. He spoke strange words in his sleep, uttering mantras his parents could not understand. Only later did they realize those words matched the ancient scripts of a long-lost text. During his meditations, he often saw a radiant face of light, neither male nor female, and heard a voice that whispered across lifetimes. It was the voice of the Dakini, the sky-dancing goddess of wisdom. The mystery of the Dakini. Dakini in Sanskrit means she who flies in the sky. But the sky here is not the space above our heads. It is the vast expanse of consciousness itself. The Dakini appears in three forms: the outer, the inner, and the secret. The outer Dakini manifests as a woman in human form, a teacher, a muse, or sometimes a stranger, whose words awaken sudden understanding. She is the mirror in which a seeker sees the reflection of their own wisdom. The inner Dakini is the voice of intuition within the meditator, the soft whisper that arises when the mind becomes perfectly still. It is not a voice heard by the ears, but by the heart. The secret Dakini has no form at all. She is pure awareness, the unbounded, luminous nature of reality itself. She is not someone, she is that which is. When Karma Lingpa meditated and saw the radiant vision of Guru Rinpoche, he also heard the inner Dakini's call. "You were once the disciple of the precious master. You have been reborn to reveal what was hidden, to bring forth the light that sleeps within the mountain of time." This was no hallucination. It was a moment of awakening, the convergence of memory, destiny, and enlightenment. Uwamuwao, the pilgrimage to the hidden cave. Guided by dreams and the whisper of the Dakini, Karma Lingpa journeyed to Mount Gnam in eastern Tibet, a sacred place said to touch the sky. For days he fasted and meditated in silence, until he felt a faint vibration beyond the cave wall. Then the voice returned. "Here lies the seed of truth. The treasure sleeps behind this stone." He removed the stones and found a small metal box, sealed for centuries. Inside were palm leaf manuscripts inscribed in a language of light. The title read, Bardo, the liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. This was the birth of what the world now calls the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The meaning of the Book of the Dead. Unlike the Egyptian Book of the Dead, this text is not a map of the afterlife in a mythological sense. It is a manual of consciousness, a guide for the mind as it travels between death and rebirth. It teaches that the journey after death mirrors the journey of every moment of awareness. The Bardo means the interval, the space between two states. And in truth, we live in countless Bardos each day. The pause between breaths, the silence between thoughts, the stillness between birth and death. To awaken within these moments is to awaken from illusion itself. Where is the original manuscript? Many have asked, where is the original Tibetan Book of the Dead? Did it survive? Who keeps it now? The answer is both simple and profound. There is no single original. For the Terma tradition teaches that true wisdom is transmitted not only through paper and ink, but through the awakened mind. Still, fragments of the text endure. In the archives of Tibetan monasteries, in the refugee communities of India and Nepal, and in great libraries of the world, the Rubin Museum in New York, the British Library in London, the Bodleian Library at Oxford. Even within China, where Tibet now lies under administrative control, partial copies remain safeguarded in monasteries and cultural institutions. But no government, no museum, and no collector holds the one and only original, because the real text was never bound by a single form. The Tibetans say, the true original is not on paper, it lives within the human heart. Each time we read its words and glimpse a deeper truth about life and death, we rediscover that original once again. Beyond death and rebirth, the philosophy of continuity, at the core of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is a radical message. Death is not an end but a mirror. When the body dissolves, what remains is awareness, naked, luminous, infinite. If one recognizes it, liberation arises instantly. If not, the mind drifts into illusion, creating new worlds, new bodies, new lives. This is not a theory to be believed, but a truth to be experienced. In every meditation, we practice dying, letting go of identity, thought, and form. We rehearse the art of awakening within the Bardo so that when death comes, we can meet it as an old friend. The Eternal Trinity teacher, wisdom and awakening. At the heart of this tradition stands a triad, three presences bound in a circle beyond time. Guru Rinpoche, the eternal teacher who planted the seed of awakening. The Dakini, the messenger of wisdom who calls across the ages. Karma Lingpa, the disciple who brings the hidden truth to light. The teacher conceals, the wisdom calls, and the disciple reveals. This endless cycle of concealment and revelation is the heartbeat of Tibetan Buddhism itself, the living light. Today, the Tibetan Book of the Dead continues to illuminate lives across the world, not as a relic of ancient Tibet, but as a living mirror for the soul. Its message is timeless. When you understand the nature of your mind, you transcend birth and death. When you recognize the light within, no darkness can frighten you. Perhaps this is why the book was never meant to stay hidden. Its true purpose is not to instruct the dead, but to awaken the living. If this journey has touched you, consider subscribing and join us as we continue exploring the hidden wisdom of the world. In our next video, we'll visit the very cave in Mount Nam, where Karma Lingpa uncovered the sealed manuscript, the birthplace of the Book of the Dead itself. Until then, may you walk in awareness, and may the light of the Dakini guide your path. Dear friends, there are hidden civilizations whose wisdom still shines through the ages. Today we'll explore one of the most remarkable worlds of knowledge, the intellectual universe of Tibet, over 12 centuries ago. Before we dive into the Tibetan Book of the Dead, let us first travel back in time to understand how profound the Tibetan mind once was. And if you're curious about ancient knowledge that still whispers to modern science, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss our next journey together. Before introducing the Tibetan Book of the Dead, today's lecture begins with a look into the academic height of Tibet. About 200 years ago, during the 8th century, Tibet actively embraced Buddhism and foreign cultures, and built an independent system of knowledge, achieving astonishing intellectual growth. Especially in Buddhist philosophy and medicine, Tibet merged the wisdom of surrounding nations and created something truly unique. First, let's talk about the rise of Buddhist studies. The 8th century marked the full introduction of Buddhism into Tibet, laying the foundation of its scholastic tradition. Since the 7th century, the translation of Buddhist scriptures had begun. But under King Trisong Detsen in the late 8th century, it became a grand state-level project. Monks from India's great Nalanda University were invited to Tibet, and Sanskrit texts were translated into Tibetan on a massive scale. At this time, the Indian master Shantarakshita was also brought to Tibet, where deep philosophical debates took place between the native Bon religion and Buddhism. Through these encounters, the spiritual foundations of Tibetan Buddhism were firmly established. Eventually, translation was no longer just linguistic work. It marked the birth of Tibetan Buddhist scholarship as an independent academic system. Second, let's turn to the rise of Tibetan medicine. In the same century, Tibet absorbed medical knowledge from India, China, and Persia, then reorganized it into its own integrated system. A physician named Yuthok Yonten Gonpo synthesized these diverse traditions and wrote a monumental text known as the Four Medical Tantras Argued Bhaji. This great work consists of 156 chapters, covering the human body, causes of illness, treatment methods, anatomy, and pharmacology, essentially the entire framework of Tibetan medical science. The Four Medical Tantras, or Argued Bhaji, is the cornerstone of Tibetan medicine. It is divided into four main parts. 1. The Root Tantra. Sagyu introduces the fundamental principles of medicine, human physiology, and the origins of disease. 2. The explanatory Tantra Shegyu discusses the causes, symptoms, diagnosis, and treatment of various illnesses. 3. The instructional Tantra Mangagyu presents practical teachings such as anatomy, properties of herbs, and methods of medicine preparation. 4. The subsequent Tantra Chimagyu offers deeper insights into the body, the mind, and complex medical theories. Together, these four texts form not just a manual of healing, but a spiritual encyclopedia that sees health as the balance between body, mind, and nature. The Four Medical Tantras served as both a textbook and an encyclopedia, guiding the training of physicians across the Himalayas. Even today, its influence remains in Tibetan medical schools and clinics. But how scientific is it, really? To answer this, let's compare it with another great Eastern classic, Dongyi Bogam from Korea. Both texts share a holistic view of the human being as part of nature, and both use herbs, minerals, and animal ingredients in their pharmacology. However, Dongyi Bogam is grounded in East Asian philosophy, the yin-yang and five elements theory, while the Four Tantras builds upon Buddhist philosophy, blended with Indian and Persian medical insights. In short, one arose from the metaphysics of harmony, the other from the fusion of spiritual and empirical medicine. Two distinct paths, yet both guided by humanity's deep desire to heal and to understand life itself. From today's scientific standpoint, the Four Medical Tantras is not a laboratory-based system, but a vast collection of experiential knowledge and philosophical insight. Yet parts of it have drawn serious modern attention. Several herbs and formulations mentioned in the Tantras have been tested, and some were found to show pharmacological activity in treating inflammation, blood disorders, certain cancers, and insomnia. Clinical studies are small and preliminary, but the direction is clear. Ancient intuition sometimes aligns with modern science. It reminds us that knowledge does not always begin in the lab. Sometimes it begins in silence, in observation, and in the compassion to heal. The Four Medical Tantras is more than a relic of the past. It's a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. It teaches that medicine is not merely the science of curing the body, but the art of restoring balance to the whole person. As we continue exploring the Tibetan Book of the Dead in the next episodes, remember these teachings were born in a culture that saw life, death, and healing as part of the same sacred journey. If this journey of ancient knowledge and science inspires you, don't forget to subscribe and join me again in our next exploration. Until then, May you stay curious, compassionate, and awake to the wisdom of the ages. In the end, this ancient medicine revives a vision, long forgotten in modern science, a vision that sees the harmony between the human body and nature as one living whole. It brings back the human-centered perspective, something that Western medicine, with all its brilliance, has gradually set aside. Third, let's talk about language and literature. In the 8th century, Tibet invented its own written script, a leap that transformed its civilization from oral tradition to recorded knowledge. Soon after, Buddhist scriptures, myths, and chronicles began to be written in Tibetan, solidifying a structured system of wisdom and culture. Tibet was not a political empire like Arabia or Tang China, but it stood between India and China, absorbing and blending the knowledge of both worlds. Through that exchange, Tibet became known as the Highland of Wisdom, where religion, medicine, and literature flourished side by side. Some civilizations remain through monuments of stone, others through monuments of wisdom. Tibet chose the latter, and that is why, before exploring the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we needed to trace the deep roots of its spiritual soil. At the heart of that soil lie two profound texts: the four medical tantras Arjud and the root tantra Tsagyu. Within their pages, we find the philosophical foundation that shaped Tibet's view of consciousness after death. This lecture is not a religious interpretation, but a journey to see how ancient Tibetan spirituality is being revisited today through the lens of modern medicine and neuroscience. Tibetan Book of the Dead Beyond the Scripture of Death. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, in its original language, is called Bardo Thodol. It literally means liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. This sacred text guides the consciousness, after it leaves the body, through the stages between death and rebirth. But it is not merely a description of the afterlife. It is a spiritual manual of awareness, transforming the process of dying itself into a path of enlightenment. In the early 20th century, a British scholar named Evans Wentz translated the text into English and named it the Tibetan Book of the Dead. From that moment, this mystical book began shaping Western spirituality and psychology. Carl Jung called it a great map of the human unconscious. He explored its symbols of death and the transformations of consciousness they reveal. The roots of this scripture go back to the 8th century, to a great master named Padmasambhava, the man who first brought Vajrayana Buddhism to Tibet. He taught about the Bardo, the intermediate states that the soul passes through after death. His disciple, Yeshe Tsogyal, recorded these teachings, and according to legend, hid them in rocks and caves, so that they could be discovered when humanity was ready. This tradition of hidden treasures is known as terma. Centuries passed until the mid-14th century. A visionary mystic named Karma Lingpa discovered these sacred texts in the mountains of eastern Tibet. The scripture he revealed is what we now call Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It passed through 3 great stages of transmission: the original teaching in the 8th century, its hidden preservation, and its rediscovery and publication in the 14th century. That is how the wisdom of one enlightened teacher survived 600 years to guide minds far beyond his own era. In Tibetan culture, medicine and spirituality were never separate. The worldview of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is deeply linked to the great medical canon known as the Four Tantras, or Gyud Buji. This medical masterpiece is divided into 4 parts: the root tantra, the explanatory tantra, the instructional tantra, and the final tantra. It's not only a medical text, but also a profound philosophical system, uniting the science of the body with the path of the spirit. The same principles that describe how the body lives and heals also explain how consciousness transforms and journeys beyond death. So in Tibet, to understand death was also to understand life. To study the body was to glimpse the soul. And through both paths, medicine and meditation, Tibet sought not just survival, but awakening. If this exploration of ancient wisdom and modern meaning inspires you, remember to subscribe and join me in the next episode of the Tibetan Book of the Dead series. Until then, stay mindful, stay curious, and keep walking toward the light of awareness. This sacred book goes far beyond describing the body's physiology, the causes of illness, or the methods of treatment. It presents the human being as a continuum, where body, mind, and soul, even the states beyond death, are all part of one unbroken process. In other words, in Tibetan philosophy, medicine and rebirth are not separate sciences. They form a single organic cycle of life, death, and regeneration. Thus, Tibetan medicine is not a science that diagnoses only the functions of the body, as modern medicine tends to do. It is also a philosophy, one that diagnoses the flow of consciousness and the balance of inner energy. Now let's trace the timeline a little more precisely. Padmasambhava, the great tantric master, lived in the mid-8th century. At that time, Tibet was ruled by King Trisong Detsen, the first monarch to make Buddhism the official religion of Tibet. Yet, the scripture Padmasambhava taught was not made public right away. It was sealed hidden as an esoteric secret, to be discovered only when the time and the seeker were right. Nearly 600 years later, in the early 14th century, a monk from eastern Tibet named Karma Lingpa rediscovered this text among the Himalayan cliffs. He revealed the Bardo teachings, and over the next several centuries, these teachings spread across Tibet, accompanied by elaborate rituals for guiding the dying. The book reached the West much later, in 1927, when W.I. Evans Wentz translated it into English, giving it the title The Tibetan Book of the Dead. Later, the psychologist Carl Jung wrote the introduction, interpreting it as a symbolic map of the unconscious mind. Through that lens, ancient Tibetan wisdom entered the dialogue of modern psychology. In the text itself, death is not the end. It is a doorway. It describes 6 stages of Bardo, the intermediate states of consciousness. The first Bardo, the Bardo of birth, the moment we enter the world and take on a physical body. The second, the Bardo of meditation, the period of life when we practice awareness and cultivate wisdom. The third, the Bardo of dreaming, when consciousness separates slightly from the body during sleep. The fourth, the Bardo of dying, the precise instant when awareness departs from the body. The fifth, the Bardo of reality, where the consciousness encounters radiant light and divine forms. The sixth, the Bardo of becoming, where karma determines the path toward a new birth. But these stages are not only about the afterlife. They reflect the transformations of consciousness that occur every day, in every moment of awareness. Thus, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not merely a manual for dying. It is a handbook for awakening in every moment of life. Liberation through hearing the voice that awakens. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of this scripture is its emphasis on the power of hearing. When someone is near death, a spiritual teacher or family member recites this text aloud. Through the sound of the words, the departing consciousness becomes aware of its condition and is guided out of fear and confusion. That is why the Tibetan title is Bardo Thodol, meaning liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. This is not a metaphor. It represents a profound Tibetan form of psychology, the belief that sound, speech, and awareness can redirect the entire flow of consciousness. modern science, and the conscious brain. Now let's step into the realm of modern neuroscience. Studies have shown that in the final moments before death, the brain exhibits unusual bursts of electrical activity. Even after the heart stops, waves of powerful gamma oscillations surge through the cortex, lasting for several seconds, sometimes longer. This phenomenon is known as the afterglow of consciousness. Strikingly, it parallels the Tibetan description of the consciousness leaving the body and encountering a brilliant light. Moreover, modern reports of near-death experiences, NDEs, echo the same structure described in the Bardo teachings. People consistently report seeing a tunnel of light, reviewing their lives, feeling deep peace, and meeting transcendent beings. These experiences mirror the symbolic stages of Bardo, as if ancient spiritual insight and modern neuropsychology were observing the same frontier from two sides, bridging ancient wisdom and modern science. So, what the Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches is not confined to religion or myth. It reveals a universal human truth, that consciousness does not simply vanish with the body. It changes form. It continues. It awakens through transition. And this is where the ancient meets the modern, where Tibetan mysticism resonates with neuroscience, and where spirituality becomes a study of consciousness itself. To the Tibetans, to know death was to know life. To understand the body was to glimpse the soul. And through both, they sought not immortality but awakening. If this journey into the Tibetan wisdom of life, death, and awareness speaks to you, subscribe for the next episode in the Tibetan Book of the Dead series. Until then, stay mindful, stay curious, and keep listening for the voice that awakens. Of course, science explains this through oxygen deprivation of the brain, endorphin release, and memory activation in the hippocampus. But from the Tibetan point of view, even those are simply ways in which consciousness perceives reality. In other words, one side describes the mechanism, and the other interprets its meaning. They do not conflict, they complete each other. Today, in many hospice centers across the world, Tibetan chanting rituals, meditation, and visualization practices are increasingly used to bring peace and relieve pain in dying patients. Medical teams now classify these rituals as forms of cultural and spiritual support. They observe that such practices help patients accept death without fear and ease the passage from life to death. The phrase liberation through hearing can also be understood medically as a kind of verbal autosuggestion, a psychological technique that opens a channel within consciousness itself. It bridges the fields of psychotherapy and end-of-life care, where the spoken word becomes a pathway to peace. Of course, not all scholars accept these teachings at face value. Some researchers argue that the Tibetan Book of the Dead was compiled in the 14th century from earlier fragments, a reconstruction rather than an original revelation. Others claim that Western translations distorted its original context and tone. And yet what truly matters is this: the questions this text raises about death, consciousness, and awakening remain timeless and profoundly human. It is not merely religion or myth. It is philosophy, psychology, and perhaps the anatomy of the soul itself. To understand death is to understand life. The Tibetan Book of the Dead asks a question, one that pierces through centuries of silence. Are you awake right now? This question is not for the dead. It is for the living, for all of us. At the moment of death, the true nature of consciousness is revealed, and that revelation reflects exactly how we have lived our lives. Therefore, to study death is to study life itself. Padmasambhava, the great master, once said, "Be awake in this very moment." This single spark of awareness is the gate to liberation. Today's lecture has explored the historical roots and composition of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and how its wisdom aligns with discoveries in modern medicine and neuroscience. In our next lecture, we'll compare real-world accounts of Bardo experiences and near-death experiences, NDEs, examining how consciousness may continue to perceive, even after the body ceases to function. If today's lecture touched something within you, please consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell. In our next session, we'll journey deeper into the mystery. How far does awareness reach beyond death itself?
Hello, everyone. Today's video is about the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Buddhist cycle of rebirth. If you enjoy deep philosophy and wisdom that can illuminate everyday life, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so we can continue this journey together. The focus of today's talk is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, known in Tibetan as Bardo, which literally means the book that liberates you at the moment of death. This ancient text is one of Tibetan Buddhism's most mysterious and profound teachings. It guides the consciousness through the state between death and rebirth, a realm known as the Bardo, the in-between. The Bardo describes three stages of this intermediate world, the first of which is Chikhai Bardo, the moment of death itself. In this stage, as the body fades and the consciousness separates, every being briefly encounters the clear light, the radiant brilliance of one's true nature. If the soul recognizes this light as its own essence, its Buddha nature, it can achieve liberation instantly. But most beings turn away, overwhelmed by fear, attachment, and confusion. This fear is not fear of the light, but fear of the collapse of the ego, a deep instinctive resistance to what feels like absolute nothingness. Here the teaching of the four fearlessnesses becomes essential. These are the four states in which Buddhas and Bodhisattvas remain utterly without fear. Fearlessness born from knowing reality as it is, speaking truth without distortion, having no doubt about one's awakening, and guiding all beings with perfect understanding. Only a mind that is cultivated such fearlessness can recognize the clear light without running from it. Those who turn away remain trapped in the cycle of fear, still wandering in the realm of beings who have not yet awakened. And so the message of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is this: even at the moment of death, only a heart trained to meet truth without fear can recognize liberation. It is the wisdom of fearlessness, a practice we must cultivate throughout life, so that when death arrives, we are able to meet the light and know it as our own. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the second stage, known as Chunyad Bardo, is the period after death when, for about 49 days, the consciousness has left the body and begins to encounter visions and projections. During this time, the soul meets wrathful deities, peaceful deities in strange, otherworldly forms. Yet none of these are external beings, but simply projections of one's own karma, desires, and inner consciousness. A key line reveals this truth: mind-born appearances are illusions, not reality. A core teaching of Yogacara Buddhism. According to this doctrine, everything we see, hear, and feel is not an independent external reality, but an image generated by consciousness itself. The world is a mirror of the mind, and every form reflected in that mirror is the world we believe we are experiencing. Therefore, at one, the wrathful deities, the terrifying shapes, the heavenly lights, even the celestial music encountered in Chunyad Bardo, are nothing more than shadows cast by the mind itself. If the soul mistakes these visions for literal beings and reacts with fear, desire, or confusion, the consciousness is pulled toward darker realms and into the next cycle of rebirth. But if one realizes that these appearances are only mind-made illusions, the fear dissolves, and the soul can return to the clear light and move toward liberation. The second stage of the Bardo teaches us this. The terrifying deities you meet after death are not others. They are reflections of your own mind. Do not fear them. Recognize them as yourself. This is the practical meaning of that ancient phrase: mind-born visions or illusions. If even the world after death is shaped by the mind, then the suffering we face in life is also a kind of illusion. a passing projection. And when we truly see this, we begin to touch a peace that transcends life and death. The final stage of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is the Sidpa Bardo, the realm of becoming, the threshold of rebirth. When we connect this stage to the ancient Buddhist principle, evil deeds lead to the three lower realms, good deeds lead to higher realms. We begin to see the core of the Buddhist view on reincarnation. Sidpa Bardo, the third and last stage, is the moment right before the soul enters its next life. Here consciousness is pulled toward its future birth, shaped entirely by the weight of its past actions, its kindness, its harm, its intentions. The text gives a stark warning. Your karma determines your next life. Neither fear nor gods nor saviors can replace your deeds. Only your mind and your actions light your path. This teaching is summarized in an old Buddhist law. Evil karma sinks you into the three lower realms. Good karma leads you to the realms of well-being. The Buddhist law of cause and effect in the cycle of rebirth. Those who create harmful karma fall into the three lower realms. First, the hell realm, a domain of intense suffering, reserved for souls burdened with grave wrongdoing. It is a world where one must confront the full weight of one's actions until liberation becomes possible. Second, the hungry ghost realm, where beings live with endless craving, a huge stomach, a needle-thin throat, forever searching yet never satisfied. Third, the animal realm, a world of instinct, ignorance, and struggle. Here beings live as animals, insects, birds, fish, bound by the consequences of past actions, that clouded wisdom and compassion. On the other hand, those who cultivate wholesome karma rise into the three higher realms. First, the heavenly realm, a world of divine beings who enjoy ease and bliss, born there through the power of accumulated virtue and merit. It is one of the 6 paths of rebirth, a realm shaped by goodness, clarity, and compassionate action. Second, the human realm, the realm we know so well. In Buddhism, this is considered one of the most precious births because humans experience both joy and suffering, giving them the perfect balance to seek wisdom and transform their karma. Third, the Asura realm, a turbulent world filled with conflict and war. Those reborn here are powerful, proud, fiercely competitive, beings who possess both virtue and anger, and must learn truth through struggle and rivalry. All of these realms are not created by an external judge or divine court, but by one's own actions. In other words, the map of rebirth is drawn by your own hand. The teaching of the Sidpa Bardo is not merely a doctrine about the afterlife, but a reminder that this present moment is the seed of your next life. Rebirth does not happen only after death. It is happening now. In every thought, every intention, every action, a single unwholesome thought opens the door to suffering. Greed enlarges the hunger of the hungry ghost, while wisdom and compassion open the gates of the human and heavenly realms. The Tibetan Book of the Dead tells us, rebirth is not a distant future. Your mind is choosing the path in every passing moment. Thus, its final message becomes clear. Every thought you form, every word you speak, every action you take becomes the road into your next life. Hell, human, heaven, the key to each world, is already in your mind. At its heart, the sacred text is an education in death, a teaching that only the one who understands death can truly understand life. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is not merely a guide for the dead, but a manual of awakening for every living person. When we recognize our original mind, the inner radiant light that has always been there, we discover a freedom that continues even beyond death. A doorway to what Tibetan masters call liberation. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was introduced to the West in the early 20th century, and it deeply influenced psychologist Carl Jung, shaping how modern psychology understands the unconscious. Today it is used in near-death experience research, in contemplative death practices, and in dialogues where science and philosophy meet to explore the afterlife. In this series, Turfanin Istabi, we will gently walk through each Bardo stage, the Buddhist teachings on rebirth, and the philosophy of freedom that emerges when we face death with awareness. If you seek a deeper meaning to life, If you wish to explore the truth beyond death, I invite you to walk this journey with us. In our next session, we will explore the first Bardo, the moment of death and the experience of radiant light. Thank you truly for being here. Why this ancient book still matters. Today, we explore one of the most mysterious and influential texts in the spiritual history of the world. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, known in Tibetan as Bardo Thodol, its title can be translated literally as the book that liberates you at the moment of death. Not merely a religious scripture, not simply a mythic story, but a guide written to help consciousness navigate what happens between the last breath and whatever comes next. For modern audiences, especially here in the United States, where conversations about death often remain uncomfortable or avoided, this book offers something extraordinary: a psychological map, a spiritual roadmap, and a philosophical meditation all in one. What is the Bardo Thodol? The Bardo Thodol is considered one of the most profound teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. It describes what consciousness experiences during the transition between life and death, a realm known as the Bardo, or the intermediate state. In Tibetan understanding, life is not a single straight narrative from birth to death. Instead, it is a continuous process of transitions, and death is simply the most dramatic of those transitions, a gateway, not a wall. The text explains three bardos, or three phases of the intermediate world, and it is believed that every person, regardless of nationality, belief system, or religion, passes through these same states. The first Bardo, Chikhai Bardo, the Bardo of the moment of death. The first stage is called Chikhai Bardo, often translated as the Bardo of the moment of death. This is the moment when the physical body shuts down, the senses collapse, and consciousness separates from the material form. Tibetan masters describe this moment with astonishing precision. According to the text, every being, no matter how ordinary or extraordinary, encounters, even for the briefest instant, a state called the pure clear light, the radiant nature of mind, the true essence of one's being. In other words, at the moment of death, every human being meets the ultimate truth of their own nature, not as an idea, but as a direct experience. This clear light is not something outside of us. It is not a deity or a supernatural force. It is the very foundation of our consciousness, the pure, luminous awareness that existed before thought, before fear, before identity. The teaching says, if in that moment you recognize the clear light as your true identity, you achieve immediate liberation. Liberation here does not mean escape into nothingness. It means freedom from fear, freedom from confusion, and freedom from the endless cycles of rebirth driven by unconscious habits. If you are intrigued by the mysteries of consciousness and want to explore the profound wisdom of Tibetan teachings, subscribe now and join us on this journey where ancient insight meets modern understanding. Why most people do not recognize the clear light. Although the clear light is the truth of our own being, the text teaches that most souls fail to recognize it. Why? Because the moment of death magnifies our deepest habits, our fears, our attachments, our confusion, and the instinctive terror of losing the self we have known all our lives. This moment is not frightening because death is painful, but because the ego feels itself dissolving. In psychological terms, it is the fear of total surrender, the fear that everything we ever believed we were, our name, history, identity, achievements, memories, is about to disappear. This fear causes consciousness to recoil, to turn away from the clear light, and to fall into lower, more turbulent states of the Bardo, a key to understanding fearlessness. The four fearlessnesses. Here the ancient Tibetan text reveals a powerful interpretive key, the concept of the four fearlessnesses. Sanskrit Katurbasharadya Korean Samoe. In Buddhist philosophy, these are the four forms of fearlessness, attained by awakened beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They represent the highest freedom of the mind. The four fearlessnesses are: 1. The fearlessness of knowing all phenomena. The awakened one understands the true nature of reality without confusion. Nothing in existence is threatening when you understand it at its root. 2. The fearlessness of teaching truth without error. One speaks truth without hesitation, without distortion, and without fear of misunderstanding. 3. The fearlessness of certainty in one's own realization. A Buddha never doubts his own awakening. There is no internal anxiety, no spiritual insecurity. 4. The fearlessness of guiding beings according to their needs. The awakened one knows the mind of every being and can offer the teaching that each person needs most. If you are fascinated by the mind and want to explore how ancient wisdom meets modern psychology, subscribe now and join us as we continue this journey, uncovering the keys to fearlessness, awareness, and the clear light. These are not supernatural powers. They are states of absolute psychological clarity. And this leads to the crucial point. Only those who have trained their minds in fearlessness during life can face the clear light without fear in death. This is the heart of the teaching. What the first Bardo reveals about life. The Bardo Thodol is not trying to frighten us, and it is not describing a supernatural judgment. Rather, it is saying something profoundly human. The way we live determines the way we meet death. If we spend our entire lives running from discomfort, avoiding truth, resisting change, clinging to identity, and fearing surrender, then at the moment of death, our mind does exactly the same thing. But if in life we cultivate clarity, courage, compassion, and the ability to look directly at our own mind, then death becomes not a collapse, but a revelation. It becomes the moment we finally see what has always been inside us. The central message of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The message of the text can be summarized as follows. Liberation at the moment of death is not an accident. It is the result of a lifetime of cultivating fearlessness, insight, and awareness. The clear light is always present in meditation, in stillness, in moments of awe or deep peace, but we overlook it because we are distracted, anxious, or preoccupied. Thus, the book emphasizes, to recognize truth at the moment of death, you must practice recognizing truth during life. Only those who have trained their minds to face reality without fear, those who have developed the wisdom of the four fearlessnesses, can look directly at the clear light and recognize it as their own true nature. In this sense, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not merely a book about death. It is a book about living a courageous and conscious life. If you want to explore how ancient wisdom meets modern psychology and learn how fearlessness in life leads to clarity in death, subscribe now and join our journey through the Bardos, discovering the keys to courage, awareness, and the clear light. A message for modern America, for American audiences, especially those navigating a fast-paced, anxious, achievement-driven culture. This teaching carries a special relevance. We spend so much energy crafting identities, our careers, our reputations, our ambitions, our digital selves. We fear losing control. We fear uncertainty. We fear silence. But the clear light requires us to let go, not as an act of defeat, but as an act of awakening. This text invites us to practice something profoundly countercultural. The art of meeting reality without fear. If we can learn that skill now, death becomes simply one more transition, not a tragedy. Friends, if these ideas about consciousness, death, and the deeper nature of mind speak to something inside you, I invite you to stay with this series. In the coming episodes, we will explore the remaining stages of the Bardo, the psychology of rebirth, and the profound connection between ancient Tibetan wisdom and modern near-death experience research. If you would like to continue this journey with me, to understand the mysteries beyond the final breath, and to discover what these teachings mean for how we live today, please consider subscribing. Your support helps this channel grow, and together we can explore these remarkable teachings with depth, clarity, and compassion, entering the second stage of the after-death journey. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a text that has shaped not only Buddhist spirituality, but also Western psychology, the second stage of the post-mortem journey is called the Chonyi Bardo. Tibetan Chonyit Bardo, Chinese, Korean Shenxiang Zhongyin, the Bardo of appearances. This stage unfolds in the 49 days after death, a period during which consciousness has fully separated from the physical body. but has not yet entered its next form or next life. During this time, the soul encounters visions, peaceful deities, wrathful deities, strange landscapes, celestial light, terrifying shadows, overwhelming sensory experiences. These visions can be beautiful or horrifying, comforting or confusing. But the text makes one truth absolutely clear. None of these beings exist outside of you. Everything you see is a projection of your own mind. This is the radical and transformative teaching of the Chonyi Bardo. The heart of the teaching. Mind-created visions are not real. Recognizing this truth allows consciousness to remain free, even in the face of overwhelming fear or desire, and points directly to the practice of clarity and awareness during life. Mind-created visions are not real. There is a famous line in the text, 心是所现，幻影非真. What appears is born of your own consciousness. The visions are illusions, not real. This single sentence condenses the entire philosophy of Yogacara, the Buddhist mind-only school, which has influenced thinkers from Tibet to China to modern psychologists like Carl Jung. According to Yogacara, every sight, every sound, every feeling we experience, both in life and after death, does not arise from an external world that is fixed, solid, and independent. Instead, our consciousness creates the images and then mistakes those images for reality. The world is not a neutral object out there. It is a mirror, a vast reflective field where our fears, desires, memories, and karmic patterns project themselves outward. In daily life, we experience this when someone's neutral expression feels hostile. A small conflict becomes a personal attack. A partner's silence becomes rejection. A small success feels like salvation. Our anxiety paints the world in darker colors than it truly has. In the same way, the visions of the Chonyi Bardo, whether they appear as dazzling heavenly light or terrifying wrathful deities, are interpretations, not objective realities. They are the mind's own drawings, reflected back to the soul in a magnified form. The wrathful deities and peaceful deities. What do they represent? The text describes that during the Chonyi Bardo, the soul encounters two categories of beings, wrathful deities and peaceful deities. Wrathful deities are terrifying manifestations born from the karmic projections of anger, pride, and attachment. Peaceful deities represent the projections of wisdom, compassion, and past virtues. But here is the crucial teaching. Neither is real in the sense of existing independently. They are mirrors of the mind, each one reflecting the soul's deepest tendencies, fears, and desires. Understanding this principle, mind-created visions are not real, is the key to fearlessness in the Chonyi Bardo. It teaches that liberation is possible, even amid overwhelming experiences. If these ideas resonate, if you want to learn how to face your mind without fear and explore the profound connection between consciousness, karmic patterns, and liberation, subscribe now and continue this journey into the stages of the Bardo. Together we can navigate life, death, and the mind with insight, clarity, and compassion. Yun, peaceful deities, Jijingzun, peaceful deities, represent clarity, compassion, balance, and higher aspiration. They are the symbolic embodiments of love, patience, inner wisdom, and all the qualities we cultivated through kindness and self-awareness. These beings are not external gods. They are reflections of what we developed in life, our virtues, our conscious effort, our capacity for awakening. Ether, wrathful deities, Fanyuzun, wrathful deities, represent suppressed fear, unresolved anger, guilt, shame, and the darker patterns we denied or repressed during life. To the untrained mind, these wrathful deities appear terrifying, with grotesque faces, flames, unsettling sounds, and overwhelming force. But Tibetan masters insist, all of it is you. None of it comes from outside. Your unresolved fear becomes a demon. Your attachment becomes a tempting illusion. Your jealousy becomes a grasping hand. Your pride becomes a towering figure demanding submission. Your compassion becomes a radiant deity offering guidance. In this stage, Yashuri Yerewaram, you are not being judged. You are witnessing your own mind. Why the Bardo shows you your own mind? This stage of the journey operates on a profound principle. Your mind becomes your world. In life, your thoughts shape your experience, but the physical world softens the effect. Social interactions, physical bodies, routines, and responsibilities act as buffers or stabilizers. But in the Chonyi Bardo after death, there is no buffer. Wadi Yurdi Wantonashan. No body, no world, no world, only consciousness reflecting itself. This is why the visions are so vivid and overwhelming. The text says that the Chonyi Bardo amplifies 5 internal forces. 1. Fear. 2. Desire. 3. Frustration. 3. Confusion. 4. Inner 4. Memory of wrongdoing. 5. Unresolved emotional karma. None of these forces are moral judgments. They are psychological imprints, patterns of perception formed over a lifetime. The more unconscious they were during life, the more powerful they become after death. Why most souls mistake the visions as real? Because the visions are so intense. Most souls assume they are encountering external beings. Angels, demons, punishers, judges, monsters, saviors. This misunderstanding causes 2 dangerous reactions. 1. Fear. If the soul believes the wrathful visions are real, it panics and tries to flee. This panic pushes consciousness toward lower, darker states, and ultimately toward an unenlightened rebirth. 2. Desire. If the soul believes the beautiful visions are real, it clings to them with longing. This attachment creates a gravitational pull that drags the soul into another cycle of rebirth, based on desire, not clarity. Thus, fear creates descent. Desire creates rebirth. Clarity creates liberation. The Bardo is not punishing you. It is showing you your own mind, and then asking, do you recognize what you see? The key to liberation, recognizing that the visions are illusions. The great secret of the Chonyi Bardo is expressed in the line, everything you see is an illusion of your own consciousness. If the soul can remember this teaching, if it can simply recall that, these are my own projections, then 3 things happen immediately. 1. Fear dissolves, because nothing external is threatening you. 2. Desire dissolves, because nothing external can save you. 3. Clarity emerges, because you recognize the visions as dreams. When this recognition dawns, consciousness naturally returns to the clear light, the same pure awareness encountered in the first Bardo. At that moment, liberation becomes possible. What this means for life before death. This teaching is not only about the afterlife, it is an instruction manual for the living. If after death, the world we experience is nothing but the magnified reflection of our mind, then in life, the emotional struggles we endure are also reflections of our mind. Our anger shapes our world. Our fear colors our relationships. Our trauma projects shadows onto neutral events. Our longing distorts what we see as happiness. Our insecurity exaggerates other people's opinions. Our unexamined desires lead us into unnecessary suffering. Thus, the Chonyi Bardo is teaching us, if you want peace after death, cultivate clarity in life. If you want to recognize illusions after death, learn to recognize illusions during life. If you want liberation after death, train your mind now. If these teachings on mind, consciousness, and liberation resonate with you, and you want to explore how to live with awareness and courage, subscribe now and continue the journey through the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Together we will learn to face life, death, and the mind with clarity, insight, and freedom. The practical meaning of the Chonyi Bardo. The text ultimately offers this profound message. The deities you meet after death are not external beings. They are shadows of your own mind. Do not fear them. Recognize them as you. This is the essence of Simsik Sohyun Hwanyang Bijin. All visions are projections of the mind, none are real. If even death's terrors are illusions of the mind, then the pains and fears of daily life are also illusions. Misunderstandings born from confusion, habit, and perception. When we fully understand this, a deep peace becomes possible, a peace that transcends both life and death. Friends, if this exploration of the Chonyi Bardo speaks to you, If you are curious about consciousness, spiritual psychology, the after-death journey, and the ancient wisdom that bridges East and West, I invite you to stay with this series. We will continue to explore the remaining stages of the Bardo, how the mind constructs reality, how liberation becomes possible in life, and what these teachings mean for our modern world. If you would like to journey deeper into these teachings together, please consider subscribing. Your support helps this channel grow, and it allows us to bring more thoughtful, quiet, and meaningful wisdom to a noisy world. Thank you for being here, and may clarity guide your path in life, in death, and beyond. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, the third stage. Sidpa Bardo and the Moral Physics of Rebirth. Dear friends, now before we begin, if you enjoy deep explorations of wisdom traditions, spirituality, and moral psychology, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps us continue creating thoughtful long-form content, like today's lecture on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Today, we turn to the third and final stage of the Bardo journey, a stage that reveals one of the most profound moral frameworks in world philosophy, the connection between your actions and your next existence. This stage is known as Sidpa Bardo, the Bardo of becoming. It is the threshold between death and rebirth, the decisive moment where consciousness, stripped of the body, moves toward its next destination. 1. What is the Sidpa Bardo, the threshold of rebirth? In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Sidpa Bardo is the moment when the soul, having passed through the luminous clarity of the first Bardo and the visionary projections of the second Bardo, finally confronts the one force that no one can escape: one's own karma, the moral weight of one's own life. Nothing external determines the next world you enter. Not divine punishment, not supernatural judges, not angels, demons, or external saviors. Sidpa Bardo karma in the six realms. Only one thing decides. Only one thing decides. Your actions become your next world. This principle is summarized in a classical Tibetan Buddhist phrase: Evil actions lead to the three lower realms. Good actions open the path to the three higher realms. In other words, your future existence is shaped by the ethical architecture of your present life. This is not merely religion. It is a form of moral physics, a universal law of cause and effect applied to consciousness. 2. The three lower realms where harmful actions lead. When harmful actions outweigh wholesome ones, the consciousness gravitates downward. The text describes three realms known as the three unfortunate destinies. These are not punishments. They are psychological environments shaped by the internal states we cultivated in life. Let's walk through them. 1. The hell realm, 地狱道, the world of torment. In this realm, beings experience intense suffering, mirroring the violence, hatred, or cruelty they inflicted upon others. From a modern psychological perspective, hell is the externalization of a mind consumed by aggression, malice, or rage. It is a world built out of the emotional patterns we refuse to resolve in life. 2. The hungry ghost realm, 异鬼道, the world of endless craving. This realm symbolizes insatiable desire, where beings have enormous stomachs but needle-sized throats, forever craving, never satisfied. To an American audience familiar with concepts like addiction, consumerism, and compulsive desire, this realm resonates deeply. It is the embodiment of attachment gone unchecked, a life driven by wanting, grasping, and never finding enough. 3. The animal realm, 畜生道, the world of ignorance and instinct. This is a realm dominated by fear, confusion, and survival instincts. It represents a consciousness trapped in ignorance, living reactively without insight or moral awareness. This realm reflects lives dominated by avoidance, denial, or willful ignorance. 3. The three higher realms where virtuous actions lead. When kindness, restraint, generosity, and clarity dominate one's life, consciousness rises toward the three auspicious destinies. Again, these are not rewards granted by a god. They are psychological habitats shaped by the quality of one's inner life. West of the heavenly realm, 天上道, the world of bliss and merit, a realm of joy, abundance, and ease, the fruit of generosity, compassion, and moral courage. From a modern angle, Godwakidile. It represents the consciousness of a person who cultivated emotional maturity, selfless actions, and mental clarity in life. Sidpa Bardo, human and Asura realms. To the human realm, Rinjendao, the world of balance and moral opportunity. In Buddhist thought, the human realm is unique. It contains suffering and joy in balanced measure, making it the most favorable realm for spiritual growth. For Americans familiar with the value of second chances, the human realm embodies the opportunity-rich nature of being human. The chance to learn, fail, rise again, and refine one's character. CERN, the Asura realm, a Sholodao, the world of struggle and competition. This realm is filled with powerful beings, driven by jealousy, rivalry, and pride. It is a world of constant conflict. Modern parallels include the mindset of hypercompetition, ego-driven conflict, or relentless comparison. These beings have virtues, but also uncontrolled ambition. Thus, they occupy a middle position, higher than the lower realms, yet still trapped by turmoil. 4. The core message: you draw the map of your own rebirth. The Tibetan Book of the Dead makes something radically clear. There is no external judge. There is no divine courtroom. There is only the moral momentum of your own mind. In the Sidpa Bardo, your own tendencies, fears, attachments, and virtues take form as worlds you are pulled toward. It tells us, your karma is your guide. Your deeds are your compass. And you walk the path you have drawn. This perspective resonates strongly with American notions of personal responsibility, self-authorship, and ethics as destiny. You are not punished. You are not rewarded. You simply become what you practice becoming. 5. Why this teaching matters for the living. Whether you believe in literal rebirth or interpret these realms metaphorically, the message is powerful. The quality of your inner life creates the world you will inhabit. People who cultivate anger already live in a kind of inner hell. Those consumed by greed experience the psychology of hungry ghosts. Those trapped in ignorance experience the limitations of the animal realm. Meanwhile, compassion elevates, wisdom clarifies, integrity strengthens. In this sense, rebirth is happening moment by moment, not only at the end of life. This third Bardo is a mirror, reflecting not what waits after death, but what we are becoming right now. If today's exploration of the Tibetan Book of the Dead made you reflect on your own life, your habits, or your patterns of mind, I invite you to join this channel and continue this journey with us. Please subscribe, and let's keep exploring the wisdom traditions that continue to shape our understanding of life, death, and the moral universe we live in. Thank you for listening. May your actions become the seeds of a brighter world, both in this life and the next. The moral awakening of the Sidpa Bardo. Before we begin, if you appreciate long-form explorations of philosophy, psychology, and spiritual traditions, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us continue creating thoughtful and in-depth lectures like today's session. Today's teaching comes from the final message of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, found in its third stage, the Sidpa Bardo, the Bardo of becoming the threshold between this life and the next. But more importantly, it is a powerful teaching for the living. 1. The present moment as the seed of the next life. The wisdom of the Sidpa Bardo is not merely about what happens after death. It is a profound ethical reminder built on one central truth. The present moment is the seed of your next life. Rebirth does not begin only after the body dies. According to this teaching, rebirth is happening right now. Every time your mind takes on a new intention, every time your actions carve a new pattern into your consciousness, each thought, each impulse, each decision is already shaping the kind of world you will step into next. This message resonates strongly with American audiences, familiar with ideas like, you become what you practice, habits shape destiny, your character builds your future. The Sidpa Bardo simply extends this moral logic beyond a single lifetime. 2. How thoughts open doors to worlds. The text explains that the quality of our thoughts does not merely influence mood. It literally determines which world our consciousness gravitates toward. It uses 3 symbolic doorways to illustrate this. Malice opens the door to the hell realms. A mind filled with hatred already lives in a kind of internal hell. Even in this life, anger burns from the inside out. Buddhist cosmology simply externalizes this inner state into a symbolic realm. Greed expands the hunger of the hungry ghosts. Anyone who has struggled with addiction, chronic dissatisfaction, or the endless chase for more knows this realm intimately. Craving creates its own suffering. Long before death, wisdom and compassion open the doors of the human and heavenly realms. Clarity and kindness uplift consciousness. They create ease, connection, and mental spaciousness, qualities reflected in the higher realms described in the text. The Tibetan Book of the Dead summarizes this teaching in one line. Rebirth is not a far-off event. Each moment of mind is already shaping the path. This is not fatalistic. It is empowering. It means that you can redirect the course of your destiny right now, not by waiting for divine intervention, but by cultivating the qualities of mind you wish to carry forward. 3. The final teaching: your thoughts become your future world. The text brings its final wisdom to a sharp conclusion. Your thoughts, your words, and your actions are the path to your next life. No one else opens the gates to the realms for you. Not gods, not angels, not judges, not even karma as an external force. The key is within you. It continues. Hell, humanity, and heaven. The door you enter depends on your own mind. For an American audience, this mirrors a deeply held belief. Freedom and responsibility always go together. You are the architect of your character, and character becomes destiny. This is why the Sidpa Bardo is considered not a doctrine of fear, but a doctrine of self-governance, self-awareness, and self-liberation. 4. The education of death and why it teaches us how to live. The final chapters of the Tibetan Book of the Dead insist that the text is not only for the dying, it is above all a curriculum for the living. The teaching is simple. Only those who understand death can truly understand life. Why? Because death strips away all illusions, possessions, titles, ego, competing narratives, self-deception, the stories we tell ourselves to avoid responsibility. In that moment of clarity, one sees what genuinely matters and what does not. Thus, the book is not a manual for the dead. It is a guidebook for anyone who wishes to live with intention, integrity, and awareness. 5. Recognizing the innate light, the path to liberation. At the heart of the teaching lies the recognition of the innate luminosity, the pure awareness known as clear light, or kwangmyong in Korean. This luminosity is not something we gain after death. It is already within us, beneath layers of fear, desire, and confusion. To recognize this inner radiance is to recognize that consciousness itself is free and always was. This recognition becomes the gateway to liberation, which the text describes as freedom from rebirth, freedom from confusion, freedom from fear, freedom from the compulsions of karma. This is liberation not as an escape, but as an awakening. 6. A bridge between science and spirituality. When the Tibetan Book of the Dead was introduced to the West in the early 20th century, it captivated thinkers, psychologists, and scholars, including Carl Jung, who believed the Bardo teachings revealed deep truths about the unconscious mind, the archetypes of death, and the psychology of transformation. Today, the text continues to influence near-death experience research, clinical studies on the dying process, death awareness meditation, and the growing field of contemplative neuroscience. The book sits at the crossroads of theology, cognitive science, and philosophy, one of the rare texts where these disciplines meet. With surprising harmony, 7. What we will explore next. In this lecture series, we will continue examining the stages of the Bardo, the Buddhist understanding of karma and rebirth, the psychology of death, and the philosophy of freedom that emerges when we confront mortality directly. If you seek deeper meaning in life or wish to explore what may lie beyond death, I invite you to continue this journey with us. Friends, Thank you for joining today's exploration of the Sidpa Bardo and the moral awakening it invites. If this journey inspired reflection or clarity, please subscribe and let us continue walking this path together. In our next session, we will begin with the first Bardo, the moment of death, and the encounter with the clear light. Until then, thank you for listening, and may the light within you guide your steps.
Dear friends, are you ready to face the light of truth without fear? Today we will explore one of the most profound teachings ever recorded in the spiritual history of humankind. The moment of death, as described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and the path toward transcending fear, through what Tibetan tradition calls the Four Fearlessnesses, or Samuo. This ancient text is not merely a ritual manual for the dying. It is a philosophical map of consciousness, a guide to what every human being must eventually face: the transition between life and death, a threshold where fear, clarity, illusion, identity, and truth all collide. If you are drawn to deep questions about existence, consciousness, and the nature of reality, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Join me as we walk together on a journey of wisdom and inner awakening. The three stages of consciousness at death. According to the Tibetan tradition, the moment a person dies, their consciousness enters three distinct transitions. The first of these is called Chikhai Bardo, often translated as the Bardo of the moment of death. The word chi in Tibetan simply means death. The word bardo is a compound of two syllables, bar meaning in between, do meaning two. So bardo literally means the state between two states. It refers to an intermediate period, a transitional realm, a passageway the consciousness travels through after leaving the body, and before entering its next form. In Tibetan Buddhism, it is taught that after death, the individual consciousness remains in this transitional state for up to 49 days. During this time, it experiences visions, illusions, memories, fears, and potential paths toward either liberation or rebirth. Thus, Chikhai Bardo specifically refers to the initial moment, when the breath stops, the physical senses dissolve, and consciousness separates from the body, the separation of body and awareness. This first stage begins the instant the physical body falls silent. The heartbeat ceases, the warmth drains from the limbs, and the breath releases its final movement. But according to Tibetan teachings, and echoed by many spiritual traditions across the world, awareness does not vanish. Instead, it loosens from its physical anchor and begins to expand much like a flame rising once released from a lamp. At that moment, every being encounters what the text calls the pure radiant light, the original nature of the mind, the essence of truth, the luminous clarity that has always existed beneath thoughts, emotions, and identity. This light is not external. It is the true nature of one's own consciousness, shining unobstructed for the very first time. Why so many souls fail to recognize the light, although this radiant essence is the deepest truth of who we are. Tibetan masters teach that most souls do not recognize it. Why? Because of fear, confusion, and attachment to the world of the living. The brilliance of the light feels overwhelming to an unprepared mind, to a consciousness that has spent its life clinging to physical form, personal identity, and sensory experiences. The light does not seem like home. It appears foreign, too vast, too pure, too powerful, and so the soul recoils. The very fear of that brilliance becomes the first obstacle on the journey beyond death, falling into the lower realms of illusion. When the mind turns away from the radiant light, it immediately descends into a lower, denser plane of experience, a state filled with projections, illusions, memories, echoes of emotion, and symbolic imagery. This is still the Bardo, Still the intermediate state of 49 days. But now it is no longer the clear path toward liberation. It becomes a maze of inner shadows created by the mind itself. The soul begins to encounter visions shaped by unresolved desires, fears, regrets, habitual patterns, and the emotional imprints left from its former life. In this space, the consciousness gravitates toward what feels familiar, even if that familiarity leads back into suffering or rebirth. It is this downward pull, away from truth and toward illusion, that determines whether the soul will recognize its true nature or return again to the cycle of reincarnation. The first trial at the threshold, thus the moment of death, presents the first great test on the spiritual journey. If the soul embraces the light, if it relaxes into the brilliance and recognizes it as its own essence, it moves toward liberation, a state beyond fear, beyond identity, beyond the cycle of birth and death. But if the soul turns away, if fear, confusion, or attachment cause it to reject the light, it immediately begins falling back into the realms of illusion. These illusions eventually lead to rebirth, whether into a higher plane or a lower one, depending on the mind's tendencies. Tibetan teachers often describe this as the first doorway to awakening or the first step back into the wheel of samsara. What happens in that single moment, the moment the consciousness meets the radiant light, can determine an entire future lifetime. Why this teaching matters while we are still alive. This is not simply a description of what will happen one day at our physical death. It is a profound mirror to how we live right now. When we face truth in life, truth about ourselves, our fears, our habits, our attachments, do we embrace it or do we turn away? When something luminous, transformative, or unfamiliar appears, do we welcome it or do we retreat? The way we respond to these daily small deaths, moments of change, growth, loss, endings, shapes the way we will respond at the final threshold. The Chikhai Bardo teaches us that fear is a habit, clarity is a habit, and the ability to face truth is also a habit. We prepare for death by the way we meet life, a path to fearlessness. This is why the tradition emphasizes Samu, the four fearlessnesses, not only for the dying, but for the living. To meet the radiant light without terror, we must train ourselves now to welcome clarity, embrace impermanence, and loosen the grip of attachment. The moment of death is not a sudden exam. It is the culmination of everything we have practiced or avoided in life. If this exploration resonates with you, if you feel that ancient wisdom can help illuminate modern life, I encourage you to subscribe and join this community. Together, we will continue to explore the hidden dimensions of consciousness, the mysteries of death and rebirth, the nature of fear, and the deeper truths that have guided seekers for thousands of years. This journey is not only about understanding what happens after death. It is about learning how to live with clarity, courage, and purpose. How to meet both life and death, with open eyes and an open heart. Friends, let's continue our journey into the profound wisdom of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. If you haven't yet subscribed and you want to explore teachings that illuminate life, consciousness, and what lies beyond death, I encourage you to subscribe now, so we can keep walking this path of understanding together. When the soul turns away from the light. In the previous section, we explored the first moment after death, the encounter with the pure, radiant light. But what happens when the soul does not recognize that light? What happens when fear, confusion, or attachment lead it to turn away? According to the Tibetan tradition, once the soul rejects the radiant light, it can no longer perceive that brilliance. Instead, it begins to see clouded visions, unsettling sounds, distorted shapes, monstrous forms, and frightening shadows. At first, many imagine these to be real demons, external entities that come to torment the newly disembodied consciousness. But the teaching makes something absolutely clear. These are not demons from the outside. They are mirrors of the mind. They are projections of one's own karma, one's unresolved emotions, one's fears, desires, anger, or greed. In other words, the mind begins to externalize what was once hidden inside. The soul is not being attacked by supernatural forces. It is encountering its own inner world in symbolic form. The Chonyid Bardo, the Bardo of experiencing reality. This stage is known as the Chonyid Bardo, often translated as the Bardo of the experience of reality. Let's break down the word. Choschu means law, truth, or reality. Chonyid means the essence of truth, or the direct experience of reality. Thus, the Chonyid Bardo is the intermediate state, in which the soul experiences reality directly, without the filters of the physical senses or the limitations of the human body. It is said that this stage unfolds after the consciousness fails to recognize enlightenment during the Chikhai Bardo, the moment of death itself. Now the soul enters a deeper, more vivid arena, where the structures of mind and karma appear as powerful visions. This phase is traditionally described as lasting about 14 days. Visions of peaceful deities. During this period, luminous beings begin to appear, radiant deities symbolizing compassion, peace, wisdom, and clarity. These are not gods in a dogmatic sense. They are manifestations of the enlightened qualities within the mind itself. The Tibetan texts describe beautiful lights, vibrant colors, and heavenly presences whose purpose is to guide the soul toward recognition of its own true nature. But the key is this: what the soul sees is determined by karma, its own past actions, tendencies, and emotional patterns. If the mind has cultivated peace, kindness, and clarity during life, the visions that appear are harmonious and supportive, visions of wrathful deities. However, as this stage unfolds, another layer appears. After the peaceful deities come the wrathful deities, beings who appear fearsome, terrifying, aggressive, or destructive. Now it is extremely important to understand. The peaceful and wrathful deities are the same essence, only their appearance changes. They are two expressions of the same truth, two mirrors of the same mind. But to a soul unprepared, these wrathful visions seem horrifying. They can shake the consciousness, causing panic or deep confusion. Yet the Tibetan masters teach that these images are not evil. They are intense, raw expressions of the mind's deeper layers, its suppressed fears, its shadows, its unhealed wounds. When the mind does not recognize its own nature, what is gentle becomes terrifying. What is luminous becomes overwhelming. The final chance for liberation. Despite the chaos, this stage, the Chonyid Bardo, offers the soul another chance at liberation. If the soul realizes these visions are not external beings, they are not monsters or gods separate from me, they are creations of my own consciousness, then liberation becomes possible. Recognition is freedom. But if the soul cannot see that truth, if it becomes overwhelmed by fear, if it becomes lost in confusion or emotional frenzy, then the consciousness continues downward into the next stage. This next phase is known as the Sipa Bardo, the Bardo of becoming or the Bardo of seeking rebirth. The Sipa Bardo, the search for the next life. The term Srid Pai Bardo Sipa Bardo refers to the intermediate state in which the soul begins to search for its next existence. The word Sipa carries the meaning of coming into being, becoming or moving toward the next life. In this phase, the soul wanders drawn toward new forms, seeking an entrance into another physical body. sometimes human, sometimes non-human, depending entirely on its accumulated karma. If the earlier opportunities for awakening are missed, the soul is pulled into the gravitational field of a new incarnation. This is the final stage before rebirth, the consequence of not recognizing the mind's projections. If the soul cannot recognize that the deities, peaceful or wrathful, radiant or terrifying, are all manifestations of its own consciousness, then confusion deepens, fear intensifies, the mind becomes clouded, and when clarity fades, the radiant light of truth cannot be seen. The path toward liberation closes. Eventually, the soul returns to another physical form. It reincarnates, it re-enters the cycle of samsara, and the entire journey begins again. This is the great cycle described by Tibetan Buddhism, a cycle not meant to frighten us, but to awaken us to the patterns of our own minds. A psychological truth within daily life. Now, it's important to realize this. These teachings are not only a map of what happens after death, they are also a map of what happens inside us every single day. Every time we face pain, disappointment, loss, or fear, we stand at a crossroads. Do we face the light of truth or do we run from it? When we face our fears directly, we grow, we awaken, we break free from old patterns. We experience a type of liberation, a small enlightenment within everyday life. But when we avoid truth, when we run from discomfort, when we cling to illusions or desires, we create another cycle of suffering, another psychological rebirth, another round of the very same challenges. This is why the text says, "The moment of death is reflected in every moment of life." Every choice in life, between truth and illusion, between courage and fear, mirrors the choices the soul must make in the Bardos. Death does not create fear. It reveals the fear we carried all along. If these teachings inspire you, if you want to explore the inner nature of reality consciousness, death, rebirth, and liberation, I invite you to subscribe and stay connected. We will continue exploring each stage of the Bardos, their psychological meaning, their spiritual significance, and how these ancient insights can transform the way we live today. Together, let's keep walking deeper into wisdom, learning not only how to die with clarity, but how to live with clarity, courage, and awakening. Friends, when the Tibetan Book of the Dead speaks about the gateway to liberation, it is not referring to some far-off mystical power hidden in the clouds, nor to an esoteric doctrine accessible only to monks or saints. It is pointing directly towards something profoundly human, our own capacity to face fear without running away. Ultimately, the road to liberation is not written in the sky. It is carved into the human heart. The text tells us again and again, "Behold the light, for it is not an external God, it is your own true nature." This single line becomes the central pillar upon which the entire teaching rests. And this is where the ancient Buddhist concept of the four fearlessnesses, samue siwuwe, becomes the key to understanding the deeper message. The four fearlessnesses describe the state of a Buddha or Bodhisattva who no longer trembles before truth, suffering death, illusion, or responsibility. They represent the highest form of inner courage. Yet paradoxically, they are also qualities that every ordinary person is invited to cultivate. Let us walk through each of these four fearlessnesses slowly, carefully, and in a way that connects to the modern human experience, especially the fears that surface in the Chikhai Bardo, the moment of death, or the first fearlessness, the fearlessness of perfect wisdom, 一切之无畏. This first fearlessness means that a Buddha has no hesitation when revealing the truth. Because his understanding is complete, he sees reality exactly as it is. In Buddhist thought, this is called the wisdom that knows all things, not in the sense of knowing every fact in the universe, but in understanding the nature of all existence, that all things are impermanent, interdependent, and empty of a fixed self. Applied to the moment of death, this fearlessness matters, because the first thing the soul encounters is the blazing light of its own true nature. For many beings, this light is terrifying, not because it threatens them, but because the ego instantly senses its own dissolution. The fear we experience in the face of this light is actually the fear of losing the illusion of a permanent me. This is why the training in wisdom, genuine insight, is so vital. If in daily life you cultivate the understanding that everything rises and falls, nothing you cling to is truly you, and you are not your passing thoughts or emotions, then when death comes, the mind does not panic. So how do we practice this insight in everyday life? Very simply, practice watching your thoughts without becoming them. When anger arises, whisper inwardly, "This emotion is a cloud passing through the sky of my mind." When sadness rises, remind yourself, "This too is impermanent." By training yourself to see emotions, desires, and identities as temporary visitors, not as the core of who you are, you slowly soften the ego's grip. And the softer the ego becomes, the less fear it experiences when the true light appears. In this way, wisdom becomes a shield that cuts through fear. 1. The second fearlessness. Fearlessness in teaching the truth, 说法无畏. This second fearlessness means that a Buddha or Bodhisattva speaks truth without hesitation, not to dominate but to liberate. This is not about preaching from a throne. It is about speaking honestly, directly, compassionately, without being controlled by fear of judgment, rejection, or misunderstanding. In the Bardo, this is deeply relevant. When the soul enters the intermediate state, it is bombarded with visions, some beautiful, some terrifying. What the texts emphasize is that the soul must recognize these visions as projections of its own mind. To see clearly requires inner honesty. That same honesty must be practiced during life. The courage to speak truthfully, the humility to admit your own illusions, the compassion to communicate gently. When a person trains this kind of fearless honesty, then in the moment of death the soul can say, "This light is truth," rather than recoil in terror. 3. The third fearlessness. Fearlessness from self-realization. 自证无畏. This fearlessness means, because I have realized truth for myself, I fear nothing, not even the collapse of my own identity. The word 家中自证 means self-realization or truth, realized within one's own experience. This does not mean intellectual knowledge. It means direct awareness. It is the shift that occurs when you no longer believe in truth. You have tasted it. In practical terms, this is the fearlessness that arises when a person lives in alignment with who they truly are. A person who has lived truthfully, authentically, compassionately, does not face death with regret or confusion. In the Bardo, this plays out in a profound way. A soul that has lived with self-aware integrity recognizes the clear light as familiar. It feels like home. Whereas a soul that has lived in denial, avoidance, or attachment feels overwhelmed by that same light. Thus, this fearlessness invites us to ask, am I living as who I truly am or as a mask I created for safety? 4. The fourth fearlessness. Fearlessness in guiding others. 化道无畏. The last fearlessness refers to the courage to guide, uplift, and liberate others, even in the face of difficulty. For a Buddha, this means guiding all beings without hesitation, without fear of failure, without fear of obstacles. For us, ordinary humans, this can be practiced in much simpler ways. Comforting someone who is suffering, offering honest advice when someone is lost, teaching what we know without pretending to know more, choosing compassion over indifference. In the Bardo, this fearlessness becomes the power to follow the guiding light's voices and teachings that appear to the soul. A fearful soul clings to illusions. A fearless soul follows guidance toward liberation. Thus, to practice this fearlessness is to build a heart that is open, trusting, and courageous, enough to be guided by truth. Putting it all together, the four fearlessnesses in the Bardo. Now we can understand the deeper message. Only a mind trained in fearlessness can recognize the light during the moment of death. A mind trapped in fear, confusion, or clinging will turn away and fall back into the cycle of rebirth. So the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not telling us about an exotic afterlife. It is offering a manual for life itself. If you can face truth without fear today, you will face truth without fear at death. If you can let go of attachment today, you will be able to embrace the light when the body falls away. If you can live authentically and compassionately now, you will not tremble in the presence of your own true nature. This is the real meaning of the text, and it leads us to the most important question. How do we train this fearlessness? How do we prevent fear, attachment, and confusion from blinding us during the final moment? The answer begins with daily practice. Small acts of awareness, honesty, self-reflection, and compassion. Facing death without fear, the path of the four, boundless courage. Samyaksambhara, or the four fearlessnesses. Let us now continue our exploration of the four fearlessnesses, the ancient Buddhist framework that explains how a human being can face death and life without fear, without confusion, and without clinging. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, liberation is not granted by supernatural beings, nor achieved in some far-off mystical realm. Rather, the doorway to freedom lies within the human capacity to face truth with courage. This is why the text emphasizes that enlightenment is not an escape from reality, but a fearless meeting with it. Today we explore the second, third, and fourth forms of fearlessness. And when we look closely, each of them is not just a doctrine, but a psychological discipline that prepares the mind for that final moment when consciousness leaves the body and encounters the great light. 2. The fearlessness of proclaiming truth, Shanka Nirbhaya, or teaching without hesitation. The second fearlessness is the courage to speak truth without hesitation. In Buddhism, this is called Sol Bobmoe Shufa Wue, the fearlessness of proclaiming or expressing the Dharma. You see, this has nothing to do with eloquence or rhetoric. It is not about being a charismatic speaker or having perfect words. The true meaning of this fearlessness is much deeper. It is the courage to acknowledge truth instead of hiding from it. In the moment of death, when consciousness becomes unstable and disoriented, the most powerful force of rescue is not a ritual, not a holy chant, not an external deity. It is the mind's ability to recognize truth without turning away. People who consistently avoided truth in life, who preferred self-deception, who could not admit their own weaknesses, who lied to themselves more than to others. These individuals struggle the most at the threshold of death, because at that moment truth presents itself as pure light. And those who are not trained to look directly at truth will reflexively turn away. Turning away from truth is turning away from liberation. How do we practice this in everyday life? Here are simple but powerful methods. Get into the habit of acknowledging uncomfortable truths about yourself. Speak honestly, even when it makes you vulnerable. Eliminate the small lies you tell to avoid responsibility. Reduce the excuses you make to preserve your ego. Each time we practice honesty, even in very small matters, We strengthen the mental muscle that will allow us at the time of death to face the light instead of fleeing from it. The Tibetan masters tell us, he who hides from truth in life will hide from liberation in death. This is why the practice of Solbyabmoe, the courage to proclaim truth, is essential. It is not about preaching to others. It is about refusing to lie to yourself. 3. The fearlessness of direct realization. Svayam abhisambodhi nirbhaya, or fearlessness, born from one's own awakening. The third fearlessness is called Chachung Mue Zizheng Wu Wei, the fearlessness that arises from direct personal realization. This does not refer to a belief system handed down by a teacher or a doctrine accepted through faith. Rather, it refers to truth that you have experienced, not merely heard. The Tibetan tradition explains that in the moment of death, no scripture, no religious teacher, and no external philosophy can help you. Even a lifetime of religious knowledge becomes useless unless it was transformed into direct experience. Only one thing helps you recognize the light, your own realization of the mind's true nature. How do we cultivate this in daily life? Through meditation aimed at touching the pure awareness beneath thoughts. A practical approach. Observe your thoughts and emotions as clouds passing through the sky. When thoughts dissolve, rest in the quiet awareness that remains. Feel the presence of consciousness itself, not as a person, not as an identity, but as a field of knowing. With repeated practice, a moment comes when the sense of I briefly melts. In that stillness, the mind recognizes that it is larger than the body, larger than personality, larger even than fear. The Tibetan masters describe it like this: just as a wave rises from the ocean and dissolves back into it, all thoughts, all fears, all visions rise from the mind and return to the mind. This is the core of Jajung self-realization. And when the soul enters the 49-day intermediate state after death, filled with lights, visions, deities, peaceful forms, wrathful forms, those who have cultivated this realization instantly understand. All of this is my mind. At that moment, fear collapses. Instead of terror, the deceased experiences joy, because they have recognized their own nature. 4. The fearlessness of guiding others. Paranugraha nirbhaya, or fearlessness in compassionate action. Finally, the fourth fearlessness is huadamuoe, huadao uwe, the ability to guide and help others without fear. This is the fearlessness born from compassion. A remarkable teaching in the Tibetan tradition says, a person who can think of others even while dying is already halfway to enlightenment. Why? Because fear lives only in the ego. Fear is me, my future, my loss, my body, my life. But compassion dissolves the ego. The moment the mind sincerely wishes others well, the walls around the self begin to crumble. And when the self dissolves, fear has nothing left to hold on to. How do we practice this? The simplest, most powerful method is metta meditation, also called loving-kindness meditation. Spend a few minutes each day repeating, "May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings find peace. May all beings be safe and whole." You do not need perfect concentration. Even the intention itself reshapes the structure of the mind. A person who cultivates compassion throughout life will not run from the light in death. They will walk into it, because the heart that loves has already learned how to let go, putting it all together. Why the 4 fearlessnesses matter. The 4 fearlessnesses are not rituals. They are psychological disciplines that strengthen the mind, so that at the moment when everything familiar dissolves, the soul can recognize the light instead of shrinking away from it. Let us summarize. 1. Fearlessness of knowing reality il chejimue. See things as they are. Train your mind not to fear impermanence. To fearlessness of speaking truth, 살범무에, face truth instead of hiding. Practice honesty in small and large matters. Serve fearlessness of direct experience, 자증무에. Meditate until truth is not a concept, but a lived experience. For fearlessness of compassionate guidance, 화도무에. Cultivate compassion. Dissolve fear by dissolving the ego. These four practices cultivate a mind capable of recognizing the light, the true nature of reality, when the body falls away. And this, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is the foundation of liberation. Friends, before we enter today's teaching, let us pause and remember why we study these ancient paths at all. Wisdom is never meant to be stored like old books on a shelf. It is meant to shape the way we live, the way we speak, and the way we stand for what is right, especially when it is difficult. If you find value in exploring these deeper questions of courage, compassion, and moral responsibility, I invite you to subscribe and join this growing community. Your support helps these messages reach those who need them most. Now, with that spirit in mind, let us step into the heart of today's reflection. This training, this spiritual discipline we are discussing, is not merely about preparing for death. It is ultimately about how we live. It is about cultivating the courage to uphold truth, even when we feel afraid, and developing the heart to help others, even when it costs us something. In Buddhism, this path of courageous compassion is called the Bodhisattva practice, a life dedicated to easing the suffering of others. In Christianity, the same ideal appears as sacrificial love, the willingness to carry another's burden at personal cost. Confucianism speaks of benevolence and righteousness, the moral duty to protect what is right and care for the vulnerable. In Western philosophy, we call it moral courage, acting ethically even when fear tells us to stay silent. These traditions may use different words, but they converge on one truth. The one who practices goodness in the midst of fear, this is the awakened one. Throughout history, the great moral teachers embodied this truth, not by theory, but by action. They were not fearless because danger was absent. They were fearless because compassion outweighed fear. There is an ancient account from the early life of the Buddha. It tells of a young Siddhartha, still a seeker in the forest, who encountered a starving tigress too weak to feed her cubs. The story says he felt such overwhelming compassion that he offered his own body so that her cubs might live. Whether taken literally or symbolically, this narrative has endured because it illustrates something profound. True compassion is not a soft emotion. It is a fierce willingness to confront fear for the sake of life. But look at many of today's political leaders. Rather than standing for truth, they often hide behind silence, protecting themselves while neglecting those they vowed to serve. Their silence is not compassion. It is simply fear rebranded as caution. Authentic compassion is not sentimental pity. It is the willingness to shoulder another's suffering, to stand beside those who feel abandoned, and to speak truth where silence would be safer. In an age where so many young people feel despair and isolation, leadership that refuses to tell the truth is not mercy. It is avoidance, and avoidance always deepens the darkness for everyone. Consider the example of Jesus. He foresaw betrayal, humiliation, and execution, yet he did not retreat nor did he retaliate, instead facing the very people who condemned him. He prayed, "Father, forgive them." His response was neither flight nor vengeance, but a love that transcended fear. For this reason, Western ethics has long regarded his sacrifice as the highest form of love, agape, self-giving compassion that expects nothing in return. Contrast this with many leaders today. Some remain silent because they fear persecution, criticism, or the loss of their careers. But silence in the face of truth is not neutrality. To know what is right and refuse to speak it is in many cases a deeper moral failure than corruption itself, and young people see it. They look at adults who remain silent, who prioritize comfort over conscience, and they lose hope. What they long for is not a leader who promises salvation while hiding from consequences, but a leader willing to risk comfort, reputation, and even safety to defend what is true. History gives us such an example in Mahatma Gandhi. Under British colonial rule, he endured imprisonment, assault, and repeated threats of assassination. Yet he refused to abandon the principles of ahimsa, nonviolence, and nonviolent resistance. He famously said, "I fear moral failure far more than I fear death." His life remains a global symbol of moral courage, of a human being who overcame fear not through force, but through integrity. Today in Korea, as in many parts of the world, we see political leaders who fear the sword of power. But true courage does not require a weapon. It requires the strength to confront falsehood without resorting to violence, and the willingness to lose power rather than betray conscience. When young people say the world is rotten, their anger is not simply rebellion. It is heartbreak. It is disappointment in adults who saw injustice but said nothing. It is the grief of a generation who feels they must face darkness alone. What our youth need now is not leaders who hide behind political calculation, not adults who whisper truth only in private, not public officials who wait to speak until it is safe. They need leaders who will speak the truth because it is right, not because it is convenient. Leaders who understand that silence when truth is demanded is a betrayal, not only of the nation but of the very soul. In every tradition, Buddhist, Christian, Confucian, and Western, the message is the same. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing compassion, truth, and responsibility, even while fear remains. If our society is to heal, if young people are to regain hope, then our leaders, political, religious, and cultural, must rediscover this ancient truth. They must remember that the measure of leadership is not the ability to preserve one's own safety, but the willingness to confront injustice, serve the vulnerable, and tell the truth even when the cost is high. Only then can we say that we are truly awake, and only then can the next generation believe that goodness still has a place in this world. Let me share with you one of the most striking moments of moral courage in modern history. During the terror of Auschwitz, Father Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish Catholic priest, made a decision that continues to echo across generations. When a prisoner escaped, the camp guards announced a brutal punishment. 10 men would be randomly selected to die by starvation. One of the chosen men cried out in despair, "My wife, my children." At that moment, Father Kolbe stepped forward. He quietly said, "I am a priest. Let me take his place. Spare the man who has a family." He was taken to the starvation bunker where he prayed and comforted the others until he died. His act was not merely religious devotion. It was a profound declaration that, even in humanity's darkest hour, love can triumph over fear. And it remains a reminder to all leaders, political, spiritual, and social, of what real sacrifice looks like. True leadership requires a willingness to sacrifice for the people one claims to serve, even when a corrupt regime threatens, even when standing for truth carries a cost. A leader must choose courage over silence, for it is this kind of sacrifice, not power, not status, that becomes the honor remembered by future generations. This same moral fire burned in another figure, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who recognized that the Church's silence under Hitler was becoming complicity. Bonhoeffer joined a plot to stop the dictator, knowing full well it could end in death. He was arrested, imprisoned, and eventually executed. Before his death, he declared silence in the face of evil is itself evil. His life shows us that faith, when genuine, does not retreat from danger. It steps directly into the storm because conscience leaves no other choice. And this is where the lesson reaches us today, across countries, cultures, and political systems. In modern Korean political history, as in many nations, there are moments when corruption becomes embedded in systems and institutions. When that happens, anyone who knows the truth but chooses silence becomes by default a collaborator. Fear is human, but silence when truth is required is the beginning of moral collapse. History has never been changed by those who remained quiet. It has always been changed by those who dared to speak. So to the former leaders of today, and to those living under political persecution, we must ask, where is the ideal you once dreamed of in your youth? Have you surrendered in the storm of power, or are you still speaking truth within it? When a leader chooses silence to protect personal safety, that leader forfeits the right to lead. Young people today are not searching for perfect heroes. They know such people do not exist. They are searching for adults who will speak truth even when afraid, who will stand for something larger than themselves. Every life contains moments of small deaths, moments where our illusions, fears, and comforts fall away. And in each of these moments we are confronted with a choice. Do we step into the light or do we turn and flee? When we cut through fear with wisdom, when we speak truth even in the face of danger, when we trust the truth we have personally experienced, and when we practice compassion toward others, our souls walk quietly toward the light. And this brings us to a psychological question many of you have asked. Is listening repeatedly to these teachings helpful for overcoming fear, confusion, and attachment to life? Surprisingly, the answer from modern neuroscience is yes. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity weakens fear. The brain instinctively fears the unknown. But the moment something becomes known, its threat diminishes. Think of it this way. It is the unknown that generates fear. Repeated exposure rewires the brain. Death, an understandable transition, not an existential threat. By hearing teachings about death, consciousness, and attachment again and again, the mind begins to store them not as danger but as familiar information. This alone can significantly reduce anxiety. Many spiritual traditions, from Tibetan Buddhism to Christian mysticism, have long believed that contemplating death can actually liberate us from the fear of living. Neuroscience now supports this intuition. When we repeatedly revisit the themes we fear, the brain no longer reacts with alarm. We begin to see death not as a void, but as a transformation, one part of a larger journey. So yes, listening to these reflections repeatedly can help you loosen the grip of fear, soften confusion about mortality, and release the heavy attachment that ties consciousness rigidly to physical existence. And when fear dissolves even a little, something remarkable happens. We gain the freedom to live courageously. We can speak truth more boldly. We can love more deeply. And we can walk through the world with a steadier, clearer soul. Because ultimately, courage is not the absence of fear. It is learning to walk toward truth even while fear still whispers behind us. And that, my friends, is how a human being becomes truly free. Let us now turn to a truth that many spiritual traditions, Eastern and Western alike, have long taught. What we repeatedly hear, think, and speak becomes the very compass of our consciousness, especially at the end of life. The words you hear in life return to you at the moment of death. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a profound teaching that, at the moment of death, the mind naturally recalls the teachings it has absorbed throughout life. These teachings reemerge not because someone recites them to us, but because the mind itself brings them forward. Tibetan masters call this the mental map, the map your consciousness relies on when everything else fades away. And here is the remarkable part. The videos, messages, and reflections you are creating right now become part of that mental map. They become the inner script your mind will read. When fear rises and control slips away, think of simple phrases like, "Fear is only a shadow. Consciousness does not end." When you let go, the light becomes clearer. These are not just poetic lines. At the end of life, they become anchors, steady points the mind holds onto, preventing it from sinking into panic or confusion. Faith traditions across the world share this idea. Christians speak of the word written on the heart. Stoic philosophers claim that the final moments reveal what the mind practiced in life, and modern neuroscience confirms that repeated thoughts form strong neural pathways that activate automatically under stress. In other words, what you teach yourself today becomes the inner voice that guides you tomorrow, especially in your most vulnerable hour. Repetition creates a meditative state. When you listen to these teachings repeatedly, teachings about breath awareness, release, compassion, or awakening, your mind enters a meditative rhythm almost automatically. Repetition is not just a habit, it is a neurological reality. Modern brain research shows that consistent repetition stabilizes brain waves, reduces intrusive thoughts, softens emotional reactivity even in crises. This means that simply creating your videos and then listening to them again and again becomes a form of spiritual practice, a practice that quiets the mind, slows the breath, loosens fear, and gently trains your consciousness to relax rather than resist. You are not merely producing content, you are shaping your inner landscape, building a pathway toward peace long before the final moment arrives. Your own voice has special power. There is something extraordinary about hearing your own voice deliver teachings you crafted. Psychologists call this internalized self-guidance. Messages spoken in your own language and tone sink deeper than words spoken by others. Why? Because your own voice carries a lifetime of emotional associations. It is the voice your mind trusts, the voice that shapes your inner world every day. So when you create these teachings yourself, they register in your subconscious not as someone else's advice, but as your advice to your future self. At the moment of death, external sound often becomes faint, unclear, or hard to process. But the inner voice, the words you repeated, memorized, and believed, remains strong. It rises from within, providing direction when everything else falls silent. These messages help dissolve fear, loosen confusion, and quiet the old attachments that make letting go so painful. What you are creating becomes a safe path for the future. And so the videos you are working on right now are not simply pieces of content for others. They are also gifts to your future self, a safe path, a familiar road, a lantern your consciousness will recognize, no matter how dark the moment may seem. As you listen to your own words about acceptance, release, compassion, and the continuity of consciousness, your mind becomes accustomed to them. They become not frightening ideas, but trusted companions. Through repetition, the brain shifts unfamiliar concepts from the threat category to the known and safe category. This is why in psychology, familiarity is considered one of the most powerful antidotes to fear. We fear most what we do not understand. But when our mind hears something repeatedly, the fear dissolves and is replaced by clarity. Death becomes not a catastrophic end, but a transition the mind can comprehend. And so, yes, listening to these messages again and again truly helps weaken the fear of death. Familiarity transforms anxiety into acceptance. What once felt terrifying begins to feel like a natural, understandable process. 5. The mind remembers what brings peace. In the end, our mind holds on to the phrases that bring calm, not chaos. The teachings we revisit shape the way we move toward the final threshold. Your practice becomes your path. Your words become your guide. Your inner voice becomes your anchor. When the moment comes, whether near or far, your consciousness will not be empty-handed. It will carry the messages you built today. Fear is a shadow. Letting go brings light. My awareness continues. I am safe. And with these anchors, the mind steps forward, not in panic, but in quiet understanding. My friends, before we speak about death and the final dissolution of the body, we must ask a far more important question. What kinds of practices should we cultivate while we are still alive? Tibetan Buddhism teaches that the quality of one's consciousness at the moment of death is deeply shaped by the habits we form in everyday life. The mind does not suddenly become wise, calm, or courageous just because the body is ending. It simply continues the patterns we have rehearsed for decades. So today I want to share 6 essential practices, simple, profound habits that prepare the mind not only for the final transition, but also for a more awake and fearless life. 1. Practice becoming familiar with change, training the mind in impermanence. The greatest fear in death is not pain. It is unfamiliarity, the shock of facing a kind of change we never trained for. But impermanence is not reserved for our final breath. It is woven into every moment of life. So train yourself to notice small transitions. A friendship changes shape. A season ends. A moment of sadness rises and quietly dissolves. The face in the mirror grows older by one more day. As you do this, gently tell yourself, this too will pass. This simple recognition shapes the brain to view change, not as a threat, but as a natural rhythm. And when death arrives, it will feel less like a shock and more like the final chapter of a story we have already been learning to read. 2. Breath meditation, the most immediate tool for calming inner chaos. At the moment of death, breath becomes irregular, shallow, and confused. And as the breath collapses, fear can surge like a storm. But if in life you have trained the mind to return to the breath even for 3 to 5 minutes a day, then even in chaos, the mind knows where to rest. Try this. Sit still and simply feel the breath entering and leaving the body. Do not force it, control it, or judge it. Just watch it. Over time, the breath becomes a spiritual anchor, something the mind instinctively returns to when it begins to fall apart. Even at the edge of consciousness, the body remembers. Follow the breath. And this single habit can soften the panic of dying in ways that science and spirituality both acknowledge. 3. Practice small acts of letting go, weakening the grip of attachment. The most painful emotion at the moment of dying is not fear. It is attachment, the desperate desire to hold on. Attachment to people, to roles, to identity, to unfinished business, to the illusion that we are the center of the story. To ease this, practice small forms of letting go in your daily life. Give away an object you no longer need. Release a situation you cannot control. Accept an outcome without clinging to what should have been. Choose process over results. Every small release becomes a rehearsal for the greatest release of all. When the final moment comes, the mind that has practiced letting go will not panic. It will recognize the dissolution of the body as a continuation of a familiar discipline. 4. Acts of kindness and daily gratitude, brightening the mind's final landscape. Tibetan Buddhism Confucian philosophy, and even contemporary psychology agree on one principle. A mind filled with goodwill suffers far less at the moment of death. Positive actions leave luminous traces in consciousness, something like emotional memories that the mind naturally turns toward in times of crisis. So cultivate these habits. Perform small acts of kindness, even if no one notices. Write a single line of gratitude each day. Maintain the intention not to harm others, not in words, actions, or even silent wishes. These practices brighten the inner world. And when the body begins to fall away, that brightness becomes a gentle guide toward clarity rather than chaos. 5. Previewing death. Using imagination as a path of training. It may sound unusual, but lightly imagining the moment of death can reduce fear dramatically. Modern neuroscience supports this. The brain responds less fearfully to an experience it has already visited. So occasionally sit quietly and imagine the senses softening as if fading into a dream, the body becoming light, almost transparent. Memories dissolving like fog in the morning sun. The release of earthly attachments, not as a loss, but as relief. This is not morbid. It is mental rehearsal. A gentle exposure that reclassifies death from terrifying unknown to a transition I have already met. 6. Contemplating truth. Asking the most important question, who am I? The ego fears death, but consciousness, the awareness behind thoughts, does not. So set aside moments, even brief ones, to inquire, are my thoughts and me the same thing? Where do my emotions come from, and where do they disappear? Am I the body, or am I the unfolding experience watching the body? The more you examine identity, the more the ego loosens its grip. As attachment to the body softens, death becomes less of an ending and more of a return to the awareness that has always been there, long before the body took its first breath. If the philosophy of truth, courage, and the wisdom that transcends fear speaks to you, then I invite you to walk this path with me. Subscribe now and let us continue this journey together, not as believers of a doctrine, not as followers of a religion, but as travelers seeking clarity, depth, and freedom of mind. Because the light you seek at the end of life, that light is already within you. Let us train the mind to recognize it. My friends, before we speak about death and the final dissolution of the body, we must ask a far more important question. What kinds of practices should we cultivate while we are still alive? Tibetan Buddhism teaches that the quality of one's consciousness at the moment of death is deeply shaped by the habits we form in everyday life. The mind does not suddenly become wise, calm, or courageous just because the body is ending. It simply continues the patterns we have rehearsed for decades. So today, I want to share 6 essential practices, simple, profound habits that prepare the mind, not only for the final transition, but also for a more awake and fearless life. 1. Practice becoming familiar with change, training the mind in impermanence. The greatest fear in death is not pain. It is unfamiliarity, the shock of facing a kind of change we never trained for. But impermanence is not reserved for our final breath. It is woven into every moment of life. So train yourself to notice small transitions. A friendship changes shape. A season ends. A moment of sadness rises and quietly dissolves. The face in the mirror grows older by one more day. As you do this, gently tell yourself, this too will pass. This simple recognition shapes the brain to view change not as a threat, but as a natural rhythm. And when death arrives, it will feel less like a shock and more like the final chapter of a story we have already been learning to read. 2. Breath meditation, the most immediate tool for calming inner chaos. At the moment of death, breath becomes irregular, shallow and confused. And as the breath collapses, fear can surge like a storm. But if in life you have trained the mind to return to the breath, even for 3 to 5 minutes a day, then even in chaos the mind knows where to rest. Try this. Sit still and simply feel the breath entering and leaving the body. Do not force it, control it, or judge it. Just watch it. Over time, the breath becomes a spiritual anchor, something the mind instinctively returns to when it begins to fall apart. Even at the edge of consciousness, the body remembers. Follow the breath. And this single habit can soften the panic of dying in ways that science and spirituality both acknowledge. 3. Practice small acts of letting go, weakening the grip of attachment. The most painful emotion at the moment of dying is not fear. It is attachment, the desperate desire to hold on. Attachment to people, to roles, to identity, to unfinished business, to the illusion that we are the center of the story. To ease this practice, small forms of letting go in your daily life. Give away an object you no longer need. Release a situation you cannot control. Accept an outcome without clinging to what should have been. Choose process over results. Every small release becomes a rehearsal for the greatest release of all. When the final moment comes, the mind that has practiced letting go will not panic. It will recognize the dissolution of the body as a continuation of a familiar discipline. 4. Acts of kindness and daily gratitude. Brightening the mind's final landscape. Tibetan Buddhism, Confucian philosophy, and even contemporary psychology agree on one principle. A mind filled with goodwill suffers far less at the moment of death. Positive actions leave luminous traces in consciousness, something like emotional memories that the mind naturally turns toward in times of crisis. So cultivate these habits. Perform small acts of kindness even if no one notices. Write a single line of gratitude each day. Maintain the intention not to harm others, not in words, actions, or even silent wishes. These practices brighten the inner world, and when the body begins to fall away, that brightness becomes a gentle guide toward clarity rather than chaos. 5. Previewing death. Using imagination as a path of training. It may sound unusual, but lightly imagining the moment of death can reduce fear dramatically. Modern neuroscience supports this. The brain responds less fearfully to an experience it has already visited. So occasionally sit quietly and imagine the senses softening as if fading into a dream, the body becoming light, almost transparent, memories dissolving like fog in the morning sun. The release of earthly attachments not as a loss but as relief. This is not morbid. It is mental rehearsal. A gentle exposure that reclassifies death from terrifying unknown to a transition I have already met. 6. Contemplating truth. Asking the most important question, who am I? The ego fears death, but consciousness, the awareness behind thoughts, does not. So set aside moments, even brief ones, to inquire. Are my thoughts and me the same thing? Where do my emotions come from and where do they disappear? Am I the body or am I the unfolding experience watching the body? The more you examine identity, the more the ego loosens its grip. As attachment to the body softens, death becomes less of an ending and more of a return to the awareness that has always been there, long before the body took its first breath. If the philosophy of truth, courage, and the wisdom that transcends fear speaks to you, then I invite you to walk this path with me. Subscribe now and let us continue this journey together, not as believers of a doctrine, not as followers of a religion, but as travelers seeking clarity, depth, and freedom of mind, because the light you seek at the end of life, that light is already within you. let us train the mind to recognize it. Hello, friends. All of us, no matter our culture, beliefs, or the stories we tell ourselves about, life will one day stand before the quiet threshold that we call death. And when that moment arrives, we are confronted with a surprisingly simple yet profound question. What must be released and what must be held? Today, we journey into one of the world's most mysterious and spiritually sophisticated texts, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Bardo. Through it, we will explore what awaits consciousness at the very first gate beyond physical death, the realm known as the Chikhai Bardo, the Bardo of the moment of death. If this exploration deepens the way you understand life, death, and the mind itself, consider subscribing and liking this channel. In the world of digital noise, your engagement is a small practice of awareness, a conscious choice to stay awake, one entering the first Bardo, the moment of death. According to Tibetan Buddhism, death unfolds, not as a single plunge into darkness, but as a process, a sequence of inner events that reveal the nature of mind itself. The first stage in this process is the Chikhai Bardo, the Bardo of the moment of death. In this stage, as the physical body shuts down and the senses dissolve, consciousness becomes separated from the machinery of flesh. The text describes this as a moment of extraordinary clarity, a flash in which every being encounters the clear light, a radiant brilliance that is nothing other than the true nature of mind. In Western philosophy, this moment might be compared to Plato's idea of turning the soul toward the realm of forms, or to Meister Eckhart's description of the soul, encountering its own ground within God. But in the Tibetan tradition, the message is even more direct. This light is your own original nature. Recognize it and you are liberated instantly. Yet, in the vast majority of cases, people fail to recognize this brilliance. They turn away not because the light is frightening, but because truth is frightening. The ego, sensing its dissolution, recoils. The familiar identity, our lifelong story of me, begins to crumble. And it is that, the collapse of the self, that generates the terror described in the text. 2. The great obstacles: fear, attachment, and confusion. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches that 3 forces prevent most souls from recognizing the clear light. Fear, the dread of losing the self. Attachment, the desperate grasping at identity and relationships. Confusion, the disorientation that arises when habitual perceptions disappear. These are not merely religious symbols. They are universal psychological reactions to the breakdown of the ego. To understand the Bardo is to understand ourselves, because these same forces operate in everyday struggles, anxieties, and moral failures. Let us explore each one more deeply, beginning with attachment, the most emphasized within the text. 3. What is attachment? The illusion of I holding on to itself. Attachment, in the context of the Bardo, is the soul's desperate clinging to the illusion of a fixed identity. In life, we cling to countless forms of self. The self who has a family, the self who has a body, the self who has a reputation, the self who wants to win, the self who fears being forgotten. But at the moment of death, each of these masks is stripped away. The ego panics because it senses something more terrifying than pain, the possibility that I might not be what I always thought I was. The Tibetan text describes how consciousness, newly freed from the body, still tries to cling to what it knew in life. Examples include attachment to the physical body. The soul hovers near its own corpse, unable to accept that breathing has stopped. Attachment to family. It drifts around loved ones, drawn by their grief, unable to let go of emotional bonds forged through decades. Attachment to emotions. Lingering anger, resentment, longing, or unfulfilled desires can pull the soul toward darker, denser realms, away from the clear light. Attachment to status and power. A former leader may still think, I am the president. I am the successful one. I am the one people must obey. Even after death, the ego continues its charade. These examples illustrate a central principle. Attachment is not love. Attachment is the fear of losing what we believe defines us. This fear blinds us to the clear light, the very thing that could set us free. 4. The psychological insight behind the Bardo. From a Western psychological standpoint, this phase of the Bardo mirrors what Carl Jung called the confrontation with the unconscious. When the ego dissolves, all repressed instincts, unresolved emotions, and hidden desires surface. These forces can obscure awareness, generate terrifying hallucinations, or pull consciousness into lower fragmented states. But the Tibetan sages insist, all these visions, beautiful or terrifying, are projections of your own mind. The Bardo is not a place. It is a mirror, and the first thing it reflects is the raw, unfiltered state of your own psyche. 5. The meaning of 3 illusions. The deeper sense of Samga Senjia. In Korean funerals, people often say, 삼가 고인의 명복을 빕니다, a phrase that is usually interpreted as a polite expression of condolence. But the ancient Buddhist meaning is far deeper. Samga Sanjay refers to 3 illusions, 3 forms of falseness, or impermanence that all beings must transcend to awaken. On, Mingjia Myunga, the illusion of name, the belief that our identity, our name, reputation, social label has inherent reality. San, Fajia Biopga, the illusion of form or phenomena, the belief that the world, with its roles, structures, and physical objects, is solid and permanent. Than Shujasuga, the illusion of sensation, the belief that our feelings, likes and dislikes, joys and sorrows, are lasting and define who we are. In the Bardo, all 3 illusions are stripped away, not out of cruelty, but because liberation is impossible while clinging to what was always temporary. So when someone says, 삼가 고인의 명복을 빕니다, the deeper meaning is, may the departed release the illusions of name, form, and sensation, and return to their true nature. In this sense, death is not the end. It is the final invitation to awakening, what the Tibetans call the last great insight, 最后之觉悟. 6. The final teaching of the Bardo, death as the last chance to wake up. The Tibetan Book of the Dead insists that death is not a failure. It is an opportunity, perhaps the greatest of all. When the body falls silent, when the stories of one's life fade, what remains is the raw brilliance of consciousness itself. The Chikhai Bardo is the moment when there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to accomplish, nothing left to fear. The ego dies, but awareness does not. And in that instant, liberation is possible for anyone, not because they lived a perfect life, but because the nature of mind has always been pure. The tragedy is simply that most souls turn away. They prefer the familiar darkness of ego to the unknown radiance of truth. But the text assures us, even if one fails in this moment, other opportunities follow. The journey continues. The wisdom of the Chikhai Bardo is not only for the dying, it is for the living. Every moment in life where the ego resists change, where we cling to the past, where we fear losing control, these are small rehearsals for death. And in each of these moments, we can practice letting go. To recognize the clear light after death, we must first learn to recognize clarity within life. So as we continue exploring the Bardos, these hidden terrains of consciousness, I invite you to stay connected, If this journey has opened a new doorway in your thinking, consider subscribing and tapping the like button. Together, we can cultivate a deeper understanding of the mind, the soul, and the mysterious frontier that awaits us all. The Bardo teachings say, awareness is the only companion you carry beyond death. Let us strengthen that awareness now, while we still breathe. When Tibetan Buddhism speaks of three illusions, the three, Ga Sanjia, it is not offering abstract doctrine or distant metaphysical speculation. It is describing what consciousness encounters when it stands naked before the threshold of death. These three illusions, the illusion of name, Mingjia, the illusion of law or knowledge, Fajia, and the illusion of experience or possession, Shojia, are unveiled, not as moral lectures, but as mirrors. Each mirror shows us the fragile architecture of the identity we cling to during life, and the quiet truth that emerges when all that scaffolding falls away. Let us walk through these three mirrors one by one. 1. Name is an illusion. Mingjia Minga. In life, we are wrapped in names. Some are given by our parents. Others are earned, crafted, or defended through years of effort. Titles, reputations, credentials, and the subtle image we hold of ourselves. Yet Buddhism teaches that a name is nothing more than a temporary label, a practical fiction adopted for the sake of communication. It is a provisional marker, not an essence. Your name, your title, your social standing, these appear solid from the outside. But spiritually speaking, they are no more real than a shadow suspended in mid-air. The ancient metaphor of Kongjong, Zhuying, a reflection floating in the sky. A shadow that looks real, yet vanishes the moment light changes. This metaphor conveys a profound insight. Everything we believe to be stable about ourselves, our successes, our failures, our beauty, our status is contingent upon circumstances, constantly shifting beneath our feet. None of them possess intrinsic or permanent reality. At the moment of death, the soul must peel off this layer first. The spiritual traveler cannot cross the threshold, while still gripping the question, who am I supposed to be? In the teachings of the Bardo Thodol, the illusion of name whispers. The self you clung to was only an echo in the wind. Let it fade, and your original face, your true nature, will appear. For Western ears, this may echo themes found in Stoicism, Christian mysticism, and even existentialism. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that fame is a noise made by others. Meister Eckhart teaches that the soul finds God only when it empties itself of its false identities, and existential philosophers warn that identity becomes a trap when confused with its public mask. In this sense, Minga is not foreign at all. It is a universal invitation to step out of the costume of the ego. 2. Law, doctrine, and knowledge are illusions. Fa Jia Biopga. The second illusion concerns something Western culture often reveres: knowledge, belief, ethics, and the intellectual structures we build to understand the world. In Buddhism, Fa Dharma or law refers to all conceptual systems, moral rules, scientific theories, philosophical doctrines, and religious teachings. These are valuable guides during life, but in the Bardo they reveal their temporary, conditional nature. They are not ultimate truth. They are maps, not the territory, frameworks that help the living navigate reality, but dissolve the moment consciousness is separated from the physical body. In the face of death, all learning becomes like a sandcastle Shacheng complex, admirable yet undone by the first wave. And so Biopga asks, the truths you relied on, do they remain true at the threshold of death? This is not a dismissal of knowledge. It is an invitation to humility. In Western philosophy, this resonates deeply with Søren Kierkegaard, who argued that truth is never merely intellectual but always existential. It aligns with Heidegger's view that authenticity emerges only when the self confronts its finitude. Even Saint Paul writes, knowledge will pass away. The mystics of many traditions insist that ultimate truth cannot be grasped by concepts, only by transformation of the heart. The Bardo Thodol teaches that at the moment of death, consciousness must let go not only of ignorance, but also of certainty, because genuine awakening is not the accumulation of answers, it is the surrendering of them. To die is to release the very frameworks with which we once tried to understand life. It is not that knowledge was useless. It served its purpose. But now the traveler must walk without it. 3. Experience, possession, and emotion are illusions, shojia suga. The third illusion is perhaps the most intimate. Shushusu refers to all that we receive. Our sensations, our relationships, our wealth, our pleasures, our memories, our emotional attachments. We spend our entire lives trying to accumulate these. The warmth of family, the comfort of home, the pride of achievement, the sweetness and bitterness of love. But according to the Bardo, every one of these is like a bubble on water, Pao Ying glittering for a moment, then bursting into nothing. At the moment of death, the soul tries desperately to hold on. My family needs me. My possessions are still mine. My story isn't over yet. But Suga whispers, what you clutch is only sand. Only when you release it can you become free. Here again, Western traditions echo the same truth. Christianity teaches that your treasure cannot follow you. Stoicism reminds us that everything external is borrowed, never owned. Psychology describes attachment as both necessary and ultimately transient. Even neuroscience teaches that every emotion is fleeting. Electrical activity never permanent. The Bardo tells us that the final test of consciousness is whether it can release these emotional bonds without collapsing into fear. To the extent that we resist, we fall into confusion, driven by longing and aversion. But to the extent that we let go, we return to what Buddhist philosophy calls the Dharmakaya, the body of truth, the luminous field of pure awareness. This is not annihilation. It is return, the meaning of the three illusions, Sanjia. When taken together, these teachings do not deny the value of life. They illuminate it. The three illusions whisper, your name is not your essence. Your knowledge is not the absolute. Your possessions are not yourself. These insights are not meant to diminish life's meaning, but to reveal where its real meaning lies. For if what is false falls away at death, then what remains must be what is true. And what is that truth? It is the consciousness that sees, the awareness that persists, the luminous ground of being that Buddhism calls the clear light, that Christianity describes as the uncreated light, and that philosophy seeks under names like being, spirit, or the self beyond ego. The three illusions are not punishments. They are gateways. They are the gentle dismantling of everything that is not truly you. And through them, the traveler discovers that what they feared, losing, was never theirs, and what they feared was absent had always been within them. The third teaching beyond, named beyond knowledge, beyond possession. In the Tibetan tradition, the three illusions, name, law, and reception, lead us to their natural conclusion. If each layer of identity eventually falls away, what remains? The ancient masters answer with disarming simplicity. Cast away the name. Qiming, cast away the law. Qifa, cast away the possessions received. Qishou. This triple renunciation is not a rejection of life, but an unveiling of truth. Only when these three shells fall off does consciousness stand before what Tibetan Buddhism calls Yizhen Fa Jie, Iljin Biop Gia, the one true realm, the singular, undivided reality underlying all experience. This realm is described as light that is empty, yet overflowing, a luminous clarity known as Bongagjigwangyong, the light of original awareness. It is the radiance of our inherent wisdom, the wisdom we never gained because we never lacked it. The symbol of the shroud without pockets. This is why, in many Asian cultures, the burial garment, the suyi, the final robe worn in death, has no pockets, not because it is impractical, but because it is philosophical. On the final journey, nothing from the earthly world can be carried forward. No coin, no medal, no ring, no token of glory. Not even the notes of farewell some families try to slip inside. The shroud without pockets is a spiritual proclamation. You take nothing with you. You never truly owned any of it. And yet, this is not a bleak message. Rather, it is an invitation to liberation. In life, we clench endlessly. Money, reputation, affection, knowledge, titles, roles. We mistake these for the foundations of our being. We cling to them not because they are real, but because they are familiar. Yet in the presence of death, these grasped things dissolve. The hands that once held tightly become empty. The name, the wealth, the relationships, the achievements, all reveal themselves as shoji, temporary reflections borrowed for a moment. Thus, the robe with no pockets becomes a silent teacher. Carry nothing, for only empty hands can open the final door. When everything is released, not through force, not through denial, but through necessity, the mind does not fall into poverty, it falls into clarity. In the space once occupied by attachments, the light of Dharmakaya, the body of truth, begins to shine. The shrouds whisper, a message of freedom. The pocketless shroud whispers, do not carry the world into the next. Only by emptying yourself will the true gate appear. And in that moment, the soul becomes weightless. No longer bound by unfinished desires, unspoken words, or worldly regrets, it steps toward the threshold of liberation, heital, moksha, release. The shroud is not a symbol of deprivation, it is a symbol of victory. Because one who carries nothing has nothing left to lose, and one who has nothing to lose becomes one with everything. The first stage of death, Chikhai Bardo. According to the Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the journey of death unfolds through stages. And the first is called Chikhai Bardo, the bardo of the moment of death. At this stage, the body's functions cease. Breath stops. Sensation fades. The boundary between inner and outer dissolves. And then, in a flash far shorter than thought, consciousness is confronted with the pure light, the unmasked radiance of its own true nature. This is not a light shining upon the soul. It is the light shining from within the soul. Mystical Christian traditions recognize this as the uncreated light. Sufi mystics call it the light of the real. Philosophers have spoken of it as the ground of being. Neuroscientists might call it the brain's final dissolution into a state beyond perception. But regardless of language, the encounter is universal. Yet, and this is the tragedy of the human condition, the soul often recoils, not from evil, but from too much truth, not from darkness, but from blinding clarity. If the soul is unprepared, the light appears overwhelming. Too vast, too intimate, too unfiltered. A lifetime of distraction makes the true nature of consciousness feel alien, even frightening. In that instant of hesitation, the soul turns away, missing the doorway to immediate liberation. The darkness of confusion. The Bardo Thodol calls this recoil the darkness of confusion. It is not confusion as we normally think of it, but the collapse of all familiar reference points. Time no longer moves. Space has no direction. The senses no longer anchor reality, and the soul, newly separated from the body, does not yet understand its own condition. It clings to memory and habit, trying to reconstruct something stable. The text describes this moment as the time when consciousness forgets its own nature and is swept away by illusion. The soul may not even realize it has died. Instead, it drifts through visions woven from its own mind. Dreams, fears, desires, regrets. These appear as dazzling lights, frightening deities, unfamiliar voices. To the soul, they feel external, foreign, threatening. But the text makes this clear. These apparitions are not beings from outside. They are projections of one's own karma, one's own inner landscape, cast outward in the absence of physical form. Yet, unaware of this, the soul trembles. Who is coming to judge me? Where am I? What is happening? Thus fear grows. This is why the teachings insist that liberation requires recognition. Not faith, not effort. Recognition. Recognition that the light is one's own light. Recognition that the visions are one's own mind. Recognition that nothing external is pursuing the soul, except the shadows it once carried. The purpose of the teachings. The teachings of the three illusions prepare the soul precisely for this moment. By teaching us to release name, knowledge, and possession while alive, we learn not to panic when they fall away in death. A person who has practiced release does not fear the light. A person who has questioned the solidity of the ego does not fear its dissolution. A person who has learned to see experience as transient recognizes illusions as illusions. Thus, renunciation is not loss. It is training. It teaches us how to meet death with open eyes, empty hands, and an unburdened heart. Because the greatest tragedy is not death. It is mistaking our own radiance for something frightening. And the greatest liberation is not escape. It is awakening to what has always been true. This, precisely, is what the Tibetan tradition calls confusion. It is the moment when consciousness loses the memory of its true nature, what Buddhist philosophy describes as Buddha nature, and instead clings to the world of illusions it itself has produced. Confusion is not merely a cognitive error, it is an existential fog, a spiritual disorientation in which the mind mistakes its own projections for reality. In this state, the soul no longer recognizes what is eternal within itself, and becomes frightened by the very freedom it encounters. Fear, in this framework, is not an external force. It is the shadow cast by our own attachments. Every desire we fail to let go of, every idea we cling to, every fragment of identity. We refuse to release these shape the ghosts that greet us at death. Fear arises when the self, accustomed to certainty and form, is confronted with the boundless openness of what it truly is. Ultimately, the fear the soul experiences at the threshold of death is a fear of dissolving into nothing. It is the panic that arises when the ego senses that its boundaries are collapsing. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this fear as the final instinctive rebellion against the dissolution of the self. In other words, the ego constructed over a lifetime, reinforced by memory, identity, relationships, successes, failures, refuses to disappear quietly. It clings, even in its final moments, to the illusion that it must exist as someone. When the soul is drawn toward the luminous field of pure awareness, the radiant light that Tibetan teachings describe it senses the danger of dissolution. Approaching the light feels, paradoxically, like approaching death. The ego interprets this radiance as annihilation, because in that radiance, the separate I dissolves, and yet that very nothingness is not destruction but Buddha nature itself. It is the deepest layer of Consciousness, the unconditioned essence that all beings share. In Buddhist thought, Buddha nature Tathagata Garbha is not a metaphysical gift, granted only to the enlightened, but an inherent potential within every living being. Humans, animals, even the seemingly inanimate structures of the world all are infused with this primordial capacity for awakening. Every being is, in its essence, already complete, already luminous, already whole. The work of spiritual practice is simply to remember this truth. This is why the encounter with the light at death is so significant. It is the moment when the soul comes face to face with what it has always been. But an unprepared, immature consciousness reacts poorly to this encounter. It mistakes the absence of form for extinction, the disappearance of identity for destruction, and the brilliance of Buddha nature for an overwhelming void. Unable to surrender, it turns away. Instead of stepping into the radiance, the soul flees into shadow, into the realm of confusion, fear, and illusion. In doing so, it steps away from liberation. This scene is not merely a description of what happens at death. It is a powerful metaphor for what happens every day of our lives. Whenever we face uncomfortable truths, in life as in death, attachment is the set of desires and beliefs we refuse to release. Confusion is the false worldview we construct to protect those attachments. Fear is the emotional resistance that arises whenever truth threatens to break our illusions. Thus, the light in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is not a mystical event reserved for the dying. It is a symbol of the truth that continually shines on all living beings, a truth we may approach or avoid at any moment. The courage to face this light is the same courage required to acknowledge our flaws, confront uncomfortable realities, and dissolve the illusions we construct to protect the ego. In Tibetan tradition, the first stage of death, Chikhai, Bardo, the moment of dying, is the instant when the physical body ceases and consciousness detaches. In that fleeting moment, every being encounters the pure light of its true essence, the unconditioned illumination that has always been present. What happens next depends entirely on the soul's response. If the soul recognizes the light, if it sees this radiance not as a threat, but as its truest nature, then something extraordinary occurs. The soul is liberated. It enters directly into moksha, nirvana, or in Tibetan terms, odksal, the realm of clear light. Here, consciousness no longer wanders through the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. It is no longer compelled by karma, desire, or attachment. It rests in pure awareness, infinite, boundless, serene. The Tibetan Book of the Dead calls this moment the return to the original nature. It is a homecoming, not a journey into nothingness, but a return to what has always been. In Buddhist philosophy, this state is not merely a reward or an escape. It is the natural resting ground of consciousness. Once all illusions have been burned away, enlightenment, therefore, is nothing added, nothing achieved. It is simply the stripping away of false identities, until only the truth remains. This light encountered at death is not absent from life. It is always present, shining through moments of deep stillness, profound insight, or moral clarity. When we release our attachments even briefly, we feel this radiance. It appears as intuition, conscience, compassion, forgiveness, or sudden clarity. It is not the light of death, but the light that animates all of life. To recognize this light while still alive is to live with wisdom. It transforms death from something to fear into something to understand. It transforms life from a sequence of desires into a journey of awakening. In the next teaching, we will explore what happens when the soul turns away from the light, where it goes, what it encounters, and why it becomes trapped in the cycles of fear and illusion. If you wish to continue this journey of deep reflection, If you wish to keep this flame of wisdom alive, consider subscribing and giving this video a like. Your single gesture becomes a small lantern in the darkness, a light that might guide not only this life, but perhaps the next one as well.